Good evening. Let's call this regular meeting of the City Council of the City of Marysville to order today, Tuesday, March 19th at 6 p.m. Roll call.
Mr. Simmons?
Here.
Mr. Buttacaboni?
Here.
Ms. McKenzie? Here. Mr. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Samayoa?
Here. I'd like to invite everyone to stand, please, and pledge allegiance. Pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to ask our city manager if there are any changes to the agenda.
There are none.
With that, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Motion.
Second.
Motion is second. Motion by Vice Mayor, second by Councilmember Hudson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion is approved with the vote of 5-0. We have two presentations, two commendations, and one presentation. We have a certificates of appreciation for our tour that the council took of Air Force Base. Major here, or someone here?
I think he's just walking in now.
Oh, okay. Sir, come on down, Major. We're actually going to invite you to come up. And also, we have a certificate of appreciation for Candace King and Beverly Hayes for their service on the Planning Commission. And 1C, we'll have a presentation of the Community Development Services Department overview and update. I have to learn.
We got a system here, Ricky.
Sir, how are you?
Pass the buck.
Come on down. No, perfect. So, Major, we want to thank you and everyone at Beal for extending us such a great experience. So we have a letter here signed by all of us, and we have certificates of appreciation for each of those folks that kind of helped us out. Awesome. So if you can help us kind of distribute them. And I need to get a hold of you so you can come visit one of our Head Start centers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
appreciate
sir.
it, man.
Appreciate it.
Any words you'd like to say to our public about Beal Air Force and what they're doing?
Every day is a busy day, but just to host you guys, that was a pleasure, and I had a fun time doing so. So thank you for having us in your community, and thank you for accepting us, the city of Marysville.
You say you're a Dodgers fan?
I grew up in Los Angeles. Not really a baseball fan, but definitely.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Take care, man.
All
Appreciate
right.
it. You can stay for the rest of the meeting, but I know you have a family and kids and stuff, so thank you, sir. Do you guys want to come down and take a picture with the Major? Come on.
You can do that.
Okay. Listen, I want to take a picture with you. Is that fine? Thank you.
I'll take one with him too. Come on. All right. Never
We took plenty of pictures that day too. So.
Let the first sergeant in here. Yeah, there you go.
There might be a little, no.
Good? I'm at a part two, man. I'll take that.
Oh yeah.
I appreciate it. I'd love to get something. Was it? Well, that's
It was instructed by contractors, so one of you.
I saw it first, so I should be making Lieutenant Colonel. it might have been, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Whatever, man. Thanks, dude.
Thank you, guys. Keep those guys. Give me a call anytime.
We have a couple, our next item on B is certificates of appreciation, expressing our gratitude for the service on the Planning Commission. I'd like to bring up Ms. Candace King to come up. I know, thank you, ma'am. We have a certificate with my signature. I know that's worth something.
Valuable. eBay, here I come.
And then, of course, Beverly Hayes. Well, I'm going to go deliver it myself, and I appreciate it. And I know that husband King wants a picture. I know the son's already going to try to take my job and finish college. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's the future.
You're up, Mr. Bermudez.
You'll be watching.
Sir, Mr. Bermudez, is your presentation, your floor.
Perfect. Good evening, Mayor, council members. I think as the council recalls, throughout probably the last couple of months, my colleagues, directors for the various departments have brought up various presentations related to the status and the whereabouts and what's going on in their departments. I know it was a request by a couple of council members as well that they wanted to see Community Development and Services Department updates. So what I did is pull together some information for you. I know some of this information, it does come in monthly updates, weekly updates, maybe a little bit of items that are duplicative, but I think, it all, I think, works out, and I think will make for a robust discussion. So the department structure, I've been with the city about a year, and close to a year and a half, walked into the structure of a Community Development and Services Department. And so the classic traditional Community Development Department is what you see there, mostly on the top, which is with the one caveat that in some cases, economic development sometimes could fall within the purview of the city manager. But in this case, in the formation about 2 years ago, they placed that particular division, so to say, within community development. And then related to public services, we have parks, streets, sewer, storm drain, albeit sewer is, phasing out, and we're doing away with that with our recent connection to Linda, and then fleet as well. So what I wanted to do is provide a little bit of metrics. These are for 2018. Now, as I mentioned, been here about a year and a half, so I did walk into 2017 and basically had to hunt around for data, and I think the validity of data, was a little, I think, for me, cautious approach. So I said, let's just kind of get things started with getting good, solid data for 2018, rather than bring to you 27 data that being that I came in half stream, I can't validate or know the circumstances surrounding that data. And some of the data, frankly, wasn't even collected from 2017 and 2016. So with that said, this is just a very brief highlight of the department metrics, which is the building permits, building inspections, and the code cases. I think what I would point out of one observation clearly that I've noticed in my half a year in 17 is the uptick of the code cases. Jessica, our code community improvement specialist, correct title, came on in, I believe it was in January of 2018. And this is really a representation of all the fine work that she's been able to do on the code enforcement side. So we have a total of 212 cases. There are still open cases. We do, I say, in looking at the data, we do get a high percentage of compliance, easily over 70%. And I think, in some cases we have to be a little bit more heavy-handed to get compliance. And I think ultimately those do pan out with eventually a very low percentage of compliance within residents and businesses of the city. And then naturally, within public services, really the benchmark of monitoring, how active and busy we are is our service request. And so as you will note there, the requests go up to 174 work orders, and work orders completed is 145. So there is a little variation of, I would say, incomplete.
What does that consist of?
That would consist, good question. That would consist of potholes, tree trimming, sidewalk repairs if possible, also basic sewer that was in our purview. Anything related to stop signs need to be refaced and repainted or removed. Signal timing of the signals that we have in the city. So it kind of really scratches the surface of everything you see on the public services side. There's the work orders come in basically within all those disciplines. Naturally, obviously, fleet doesn't come in on the work order side, except more so on the internal work order side when we are managing the fleet for our public works vehicles as well as fire. We do provide that service and fleet service for fire apparatus service calls. We do not do police department. They're under their own separate agreement. And I think the focus and the point that I'd like to make that there is a differential between what we completed and what not. Naturally, some of these are long-term where they are reoccurring or we're in the process of trying to remedy an issue. But then I think there is quite a bit more than a handful that rise to the surface that we can only do what we can based on the limited funding and the budget that we have. And in that case, we do our best to communicate out to the resident our ability to address the issue. And I can speak to you personally on many occasions within the last 3 months, especially on 5th Street, and with the amount of rain that we have received, I often get pinged, 2 to 3 times a week on that, and questions regarding 5th Street and what can we do to repair that. And I have to put a very thoughtful, concise response to say, what's that?
Can you share that concise response so we can use it?
I will send it to the city manager, sure. Yeah, there are a couple of drafts. But so I do the best I can to explain that, because some of these rise to a level of funding and above that threshold, that they are documented. They do not go away. We keep those work orders. And then naturally, as we build our budget, we'd have to see if there's ability to do certain fixes within the community and within the city. We are aware, based on, I would say, a good thing, albeit we'll get to full-time employees and our resources, we are in a way blessed that we have pretty good staff that has been here for quite some time, and they're pretty familiar with the city. And so some of these problem areas and issue areas are definitely noted, and I think that does help us in some cases when we do receive a high, water type of rainy event where we know where to go first, we know how the system works. And so I think, with the staff that we have and their knowledge and expertise, I think that's helped us in some cases, but it's almost a cycle of continuing to pull the plug and back, where naturally I think a fix is something that needs to happen, but given priority and resources, it's something ultimately that we have to plan for and budget for. Yes, sir.
Jim, just to follow up, you mentioned 5th Street. Could you give just a little dissertation where that is? You explained it to me, but I think that the other city council might like.
If you don't mind, I got it covered as we keep rolling here. No problem. So what I try to do here is do each particular segment of the actual staffing and break that down accordingly. And so first slide here is the community development staffing, total staffing of 5 full-time employees. Spare you the detail to go through all of them, but I would highlight that, the interim building, it should be interim building official, is Gary Idy, who's, come over from another jurisdiction to help out, very seasoned. He is, a retired annuitant. He's helping out, and the basis of bringing him in is he's very seasoned. He's going to help put together the building side and get us up to a modernization point where I think we can be a little bit more customer service friendly and get things done over the counter a lot quicker. quicker, and so he was hired on to help and assist with that. But ultimately, I think in some point in the future, we'll have to obviously pivot from that position and go after one or two more type of building inspectors or building plans examiner in the near future. And then highlighting the city engineer, that is a contract employee with MHM, and I think most everybody knows John Mellon, who's been kind of the point person on the city engineer side. That particular arrangement is working pretty well. I would say very satisfied. I think one thing to note that is very helpful as well is John and MHM have the pulse on the community, on other projects, and they're tapped into other agencies. So I think it benefits the city in a way from a cost savings, is that there's some duplicative type of tasks, mainly like levee work and some highway work that has a connection to the county, where they're able to leverage those actual, that work product and bring it and apply it to the city. So it does save on our cost. I think where we have also benefited with the city engineer is, in the near term, is their experience on the recent floods that we had in 2017 in that high water event. They're very helpful with their connections to the levee and into that particular system, and that has definitely helped bring some projects forward that probably would not have materialized. So I think it's a great benefit at this point with that relationship. And below the line, I think what's important to note is, as you'll see in subsequent slides, is this whole kind of comparative of where we stack up, how do we compare to other agencies. And in this particular slide, I took a different tack because I think it's important. I did reach out to our neighboring agencies to look at staffing levels and look at why their divisions were staffed certain ways. And I think the best way to kind of express it would be that when I look at Yuba County, look at Yuba City, we all have different kind of needs in this level of community development, meaning the county has essentially, I want to go back to maybe two planners. Yuba City currently has one. And I don't think it's about doing a comparative in this particular department as much as it is about what is the objectives we're trying to accomplish with the city council. If you take Yuba City, they're looking at neighborhood commercial development, and they're looking at trying to go south with annexation, and that failed already once. They may be going back to the well to try to do that again. But that type of work brings in a different type of seasoned type of planner to the table. But in that case, how does that compare to the city of Marysville? It's sort of, yeah, we talk about annexation at some point, but I think our goals and objectives at this point are mirrored in a way where we have just different priorities. So trying to do an apples to apples comparative on this particular department is a little challenging. And I think we just have different priorities that come from the council. I would say, though, when you look at code enforcement, I think across the board between Yuba County and Yuba City, and I think a little bit has to do with the demographic and how spread out we are. We do have very similar characteristics as a department when it comes to community code enforcement. I would say they're definitely staffed above us. I think our objectives and priorities align pretty well, but we are, I think, in my opinion, as you'll see in other slides, definitely short on that particular staff level for code enforcement, that we could accomplish and do more for the community to succeed when it comes to code enforcement activity. So, public services staffing, total staffing of 8 full-time employees. Wastewater collector position currently is 1. We do have a fleet mechanic, superintendent, and we do utilize Yuba County One Stop. I think everybody is aware of that avenue and path. We do utilize them this current year for 6 months will be our contract. They will be providing us kind of backup relief service with general kind of maintenance for various parks and cleanups. The one thing I would note regarding Yuba County One Stop is this is the last cycle of our contract. So the way my superintendent has relayed it to me, this is the last year to utilize their service. And then we'd have to kind of re-up that and figure out the next path forward, or if we want to go forward with that group helping out. Another thing to add with Yuba County One Stop is very successful in assisting us with modernization of tools and various type of utility items that they actually buy and they, utilize with our staff. And then at the end of the day, the city does get to keep the tools and the work items, as part of the city's work tools. So that's, I think, a great bonus. But when you get below the line, I think this is where things get a little bit glaring. What I try to do is break it up under public works, which basically would be maintenance workers, and in some cases, and streets, and then segment out sewer and segment out parks. And so, as you see from a population perspective, I think what glares out to me is the bottom two when you are looking at two agencies that are staffed, higher than your current staff, with a city that has definitely more parks than these other communities, a larger system when it comes to sewer and stormwater, and running with a total of 8 staff. And I think what is important to point out is that when we get those high rain events and we have to do the rotational schedule, that guy in the fleet is actually part of that crew that goes out there to do that type of service, which to me is definitely an underutilization of his service, because when my fire chief needs his apparatus serviced, we do have to have the often frequent conversation about trade-offs and priority in a particular event. So definitely there is, I would say, my word, cross-training with all our staff positions. I would point out as well that when we were looking at the wastewater or the collector position, there are times when, if we're behind in park work, this particular position is doing what he can to assist in that particular activity as well. So definitely, I think a lot of cross-training, utilization of various skill sets, but truth be told, not really efficient for what they actually signed up to perform the job and their responsibility. So moving forward, I think, we have to really hard take a look at what our objectives, our goals, and priorities are, and start talking a little bit about how we can provide even a more improved and better level of service to our particular residents, especially when you do a baseline comparative with other agencies. Yes, sir.
In your slide for the comparable cities, is PW Public Works, is that your streets?
That includes streets, that's correct. Streets, maintenance as well.
But that's kind of like the staffing, like you have 3 streets. That would be your 5 PWs for the other agencies, or is that different? I mean, is it apples to apples, or?
Those are apples to apples. So
Okay.
when you look at, let's just take Oroville. So when you look at Public Works, they will have maintenance worker positions, 1s, 2s. That'll be one classification, but then they'll also have a street maintenance worker, 1s, 2s, 3s. What I did is I just bundled them together, so because there's that cross-utilization between those two typically, and they encompass one type of metric.
And that's good. I just want to clear up, like someone like Orville, do they have their own plant that's why they have 7 FTEs, and so they're.
Yes.
And then, but like Winters, I don't think they have a plant.
They do.
They do?
I'm not sure if they decommissioned or they
Yeah.
rehabilitated it, so,
We have a winter
yeah.
resident.
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
Oh, they do have a plant?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But your one is to kind of deal with our system.
Yes, correct. Currently, yeah, things have shifted in that world with the Linda connection, so we, utilize the services of a consultant for a little bit to get us over that last kind of 3 to 4 months before the connection. We lost some personnel in about the summer of 18, so we did not fill. And then we made some adjustments knowing that we would be offline and that this position, as you guys are aware, we came back for the collector position to kind of switch that position description. So that's where we're at for a collector at this point.
Thank you.
I think, through the chair,
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing is the number of FTEs that the other Oroville, Calusa, Dixon, and Winters has total. We're sitting up here with 8 FTEs, and they have 17, 14, 20, and 10. That's quite a difference in staffing for the amount of population. Winters is not as big as Marysville, and they have 10 FTEs to do the services, and we have 8 to do the whole city of Marysville. So there's really a disparity there, and I think our guys are just knocking themselves out to do what they can do. And you know, working in class sometimes, and the next day you're working in another class, and that's stressful. And I think the public needs to understand that they're doing the best they can with what they have to work. And we're going to talk about their equipment here in a minute, aren't we, Jim?
Yes. So moving forward to the vehicle fleet, what I did here is capture the span rather than list out, kind of the span of the fleet vehicles. And this is our current fleet. I would say that last budget season, we started the discussion about modernizing our fleet, and I think the council is very aware we got 2 vehicles under a program with Enterprise that we're working on a lease structure and a buyback kind of structure that helps pay a portion as we go. So we have those admin vehicles sitting in the parking lot. There have been initial discussions related to what we do with our current fleet along the same type of arrangement and setup. And those are all kind of preliminary talks at this point. Definitely likely may come up as a budget item. I think what's important to note with fleet as I work with it day to day is that whenever we have a vehicle that goes down, we actually, in most cases, can't find the part. So we have to ship it off to the local Yuba City dealer and let it sit there for a couple of days while they order the part, or it's a special order, and then wait for it to come back. And then at that point, there's a decision where we just say, why don't we just let them put the part in as opposed to our fleet guy that's sitting over here on this side of the river. So we have run into that condition in my tenure many times, and so it's a little frustrating. The other thing I would note is there actually is a couple more fleet vehicles, but they're actually decommissioned. We've had transmission problems with them, and we basically put them to the side as of about a month and a half, 2 months ago, because the trannies were going out, and basically we just didn't want to deal with having them going out while we're doing business. I think the other thing to note regarding the fleet, and it's kind of this cycle of when we look at a wastewater Vector truck, it's a fairly new truck. It requires a lot of upkeep and maintenance, but in my world, it would sure be nice to have that backup or some kind of Vector, type of unit, because there are portable type of units as well that you can get from the marketplace to offset the wear and tear that we're actually doing on the current vehicle.
Jim, have you had a chance to sit down and do a comparison of what our repairs are on these compared to if we went out and leased or purchased? I mean, a lot of times it's cheaper to go new.
Good question. As I mentioned regarding the admin vehicles, and then what could be potentially moving forward with a similar type of program with Enterprise, if they are the one that we move forward with on modernizing our fleet, they do all that for us. So they have all that detail. We've been working on the back end to give them that detail of what we do for repairs. And they're gearing up, if it is the will of the council, and this does get rolled into a budget item, to make a presentation to share kind of the actual cost to how the cost savings would work for the city. So it's something we're definitely gearing up for. So, yes.
Thank you.
The other thing I think to point out with the fleet, when you look at the larger vehicles, is we're going to get hit with, in a matter of time, with a lot of the CARB restrictions, California Air Resources Board restrictions. I asked the superintendent, do they really come around? And his answer was, yes, they do. So we have been frequented by CARB, employees and analysts, and so they are checking, and we have reporting requirements that we have to make. So eventually, especially I think high on the list is the one dump truck that's up there, is going to be, I think, after next year out of compliance with the current standard. And then at that point, it's obviously looking at what you can build into your fleet program through an enterprise type of program, or you go out and you rent the vehicle, seasonally, which probably, in our estimate is a little bit costlier than a lease, but it is a vehicle that you need to have. But that's what we're running up against as we move forward. And I would say too that along with enterprise, there are some state zero emission programs that are out there that there is a potential to utilize and take advantage of those programs. Requires a little bit more legwork, as something as simple as working with a private entity, and you got to do some checks and balances with the state agencies. But I think one thing we're finding is I don't think they can deliver the size and scale of those type of horsepower of vehicles that we're seeking. And what we're talking about is zero electric kind of type of vehicles that are the mainstay of those particular programs. And then lastly, I know we've talked, it's been brought up on a few occasions about a climate action plan. That is something will, I believe, materialize if we move forward with a general plan update. We definitely need to look at a climate action plan. And the reason I plugged it into this is because with what we call a CAP, there are requirements that we as an agency would put on ourselves to have modernized fleets to reduce air quality and help with various modernization in all facets of sustainability. And the CAP would be a vehicle that would guide and move the city in that direction. What I would say about a CAP too, it would be not only for the city, it would be something that would be transferred into all businesses within the community that do have fleet or have some scale of sustainability within their particular business. They would have to comply with those standards as well. So there's a tangible with fleet with the CAP. We're not there at this point, but it is something I think we'll have a discussion as we get closer to discussing a general plan update.
Through the chair,
Yes, sir.
the two workhorses that you have in your heavy equipment, the backhoes, they're out of compliance. It's really a problem for you because those two pieces of equipment do most of the work.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons, for mentioning that. I had a mental note in my head to talk about backhoes and lawnmowers, which is, yes, you are correct. The backhoe will be out of compliance as well. We currently, with our relationship with the One Stop, we're able to get a dump truck and a backhoe from One Stop for this season, believe it or not. So those rolled in just yesterday. I believe I got the photo. So we got that. Then lawnmowers. So I come to the city a year and a half ago. I talked to my superintendent, what's our need especially. He says lawnmowers, we're holding up by belt and suspenders and duct tape and whatnot, and he wasn't lying. Yeah. Okay, so we plugged into the budget to at least make one purchase utilizing funding we had, and we made that one purchase. We had a big hooray for that one last summer. We were able to plug it in again, and we purchased a second one. And then, believe it or not, we applied for grant funding with, help me out, Mr. Mayor, Carl Moyer. Is it Carl Moyer?
Oh, yeah.
Grant. And we finally heard back, and I hope I don't jinx myself, but we heard back that they're going to give us funding, roughly about $13,000. We're trying to boost up the funding amount to get us to an actual full purchase. So we're running some metrics on it to get us to a higher type of dollar amount so that it would be a full purchase. So there's a potential that we may be receiving a fully funded grant lawnmower from the Air Quality District.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that. I know they have different programs, not only locally, but for the state, so make sure you kind of reach out to them. I know the school districts use them to replace their buses and stuff, so I imagine there might be other programs for heavy equipment type of,
Mm-hmm.
trucks and stuff.
Got it. So I think with that said, as far as lawnmowers, and within about a year and a half or so, we replaced the whole fleet of the lawnmowers, so we're doing pretty good
Nice.
on that front, yeah. So in regards to community development, what I wanted to highlight is some forward planning that I think, in either goal setting or council staff discussion and presentations here as well, we touched on, I think, some forward planning, looking ahead, which is, the general plan update. Then accompany that would be the zoning ordinance modernization update that will go hand in hand with the update. And I think, as most of the council know, we're working on in the back end of with Adventist Health and looking at some master planning for their particular site in the facility, and we're hopeful that this will blossom into a whole type of campus for the facility and for Adventist. And I think in that case, we're planning to meet, coming around the corner sometime in April, early April. Building and code compliance. Well, what I could say is I'm thankful I have a very seasoned building official, because he has had, and with Steve's help as well, they both have had the opportunity to highlight quite a bit of deficiencies when it comes to our building code and the way we apply our building code. And truth be told, frankly, in the way maybe some things were done in the past that have, kind of maybe should be done a little bit different. So with their expertise, we've been able to, I think, steer a different course on building and code compliance when it comes to structures. I think the challenge there is going to be moving forward. What we're experiencing and encountering is a little bit of lack of understanding, and could be, I think, communication on both sides of the table of articulating the path and meeting the code, and why the code is important, and why we want to make sure that we have safe, standardized type of buildings constructed in the city. B Street property, we're currently working on that particular property and looking to bring back something to the council shortly. And then one thing that has, I think, crept up for me is art and mural policy. We randomly, pretty frequently get these questions about, can I put up an art or can I put up a mural? I think as planners, we keep hearing the same story, and then that's when we know it's like, okay, we got to make an adjustment. We got to figure out what we need to do to move forward. So in the forward planning, it's on our radar to develop a policy with the consensus of the council, so that we can kind of, so to say, guide quality type of artwork within the city. How about that? Parking management plan, that is, staff is working on that. We're going to be marching that forward. Hopeful maybe sometime this summer of trying to get a first cut of what that would look like. So below the line, a lot of stuff. I know Ms. Brown mailed out to the counselors this past couple days a laundry list of staff work, and the counselors may have received that. And what I can really say about below the line is that a lot of what's up on top doesn't happen unless there's that funding and the ability to leverage partnerships and ultimately staff resources. And so what I would say, along with everything else that you have seen and received in the last couple of days, if we want to do those things, it definitely takes some personnel, it takes time, and it takes the funding to make that happen. And I know we recently had our goal setting. Some of these things do cross into that, but then there are some things that are on the day-to-day scale with staff that we see, and we need to figure out how we're just going to accomplish that level of project moving forward. So what I would just impress upon the council is that we definitely need the resources to move forward with a lot of these items. And of course, we're leveraging the partnerships and the grant funding to make some of these happen as best we can. So street and roadway maintenance. So we have various particular pots currently within the city. We have a highway user tax. That's basically the bulk of our funding. Prior to the road maintenance and rehabilitation, which was as known as SB1. The highway user tax was basically the city's funding source for basic streets and roadway type of projects. And what I would say is we also have the State Transportation Improvement Program funding. This is actually what is funding Fifth Street. It's a STIP with SACOG that oversees the money, brings it to the city. So what we're doing currently with Fifth Street, we're in what's called planning PS&E, planning, trying to think here, specifications and an estimate. We got to drill down to what the design is of that particular road segment. And so our city engineers working on a couple, three actual options for Fifth Street. We intend to roll that out to the community and have a little session within the next few weeks, and then obviously bring it to the council to look at these options. And then from there, we actually have, okay, this is what the design is going to look like, and then from there, it will generate cost associated with that particular design. Once we have that, then we need to pivot, and there are already talks in the works to try to get that funding to actually do the design work for that particular project. We believe, based on budgeting from the STIP funds and the SACOG funding that we have, that we're definitely not going to be utilizing all the funding for the PS&E, so there will be some leftover. We're hopeful that we can carry that over to help out with the design of the project, and that SACOG approves that particular administrative action. So stay tuned, but I think, within the next month and a half, we'll see some things from a design standpoint, coming before the community and the council on Fifth Street. And then we really got to charge forward on getting the design dollars to make it happen. I think, one thing I would mention on Fifth Street and Fifth, it's very treacherous, the best way I could say. I will look at the budget as we get closer to the end of budget and see how we are doing on our highway user tax funding, and see maybe if we can do kind of a grind type of patch in that section. We continue to fill it with its potholes, and it just is not working. So we'll take a look at that. So stay tuned on that development and see if we can pull that off and grind that out and do a little minor repair to get us by.
Through the chair.
Yes, sir.
On the Fifth Street, on the parking management plan, is that going to be, that will be included in the Fifth Street design?
Correct.
Because
Correct.
of that parking?
Correct.
So
That will be part of the options that we're exploring to bring back with the community as well as with council, and take a look at that. An initial design was very monolithic, and basically, as the planners, we sat there and said there has to be maybe some way to get a little bit of extra buffer for the pedestrian, or get more of a separation for the biker. So we're taking a look at that, and we're soon to get some plans to show those three different options, and then away we go to selection, and then we drive forward to design.
thanks, Jim.
To the chair.
Yes, sir. Yeah, ma'am, sorry.
Do we have funds available already for Fifth Street improvements? Was there a grant that we were going to apply for that we had? I remember hearing something about that, and I don't remember exactly what the details were.
The funds that we have for Fifth Street are the STIP
For
funds
that.
for the PS&E for the
Okay.
design. It's not funding for construction.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right,
Okay?
okay,
Yeah, all right.
thank you.
And then lastly, we do have ATP grant, active transportation projects through Caltrans and its grant funding. We currently have a project on board lined up. There are certain project descriptions and characteristics of this particular ATP funding that I think would have caused a little bit of concern in relationship to parking and the circulation. So we looked at that particular project description and said maybe there's a better way to actually piece this together. And so we're currently working with Caltrans to do a slight amendment to that. What we're trying to do is get more sidewalk. We're trying to get more bike lanes, less of bike racks and, different parking options. Let's just get to, some real actual, asphalt and cement, right? As opposed to just, let's spend the money on bike racks. So we're hopeful that we can make headway with Caltrans on that. We're working that through the system. And so with that particular project, there's a pretty tight window for construction. We're perfectly okay on scheduling, but once we get rolling into 2020 and 2021, we're going to have to deliver that project pretty quickly. So we're preparing to do that, but first we got to kind of clear the air and figure out if we can make this slight amendment, and then away we go. So what I would like to do before the line, below the line, when I say net neutral, that reference is to our highway user tax. So when we pull our money together, that particular fund pays for salaries for employees, benefits, etc., and a little bit of the pothole fills that you see around the community. And as I mentioned, there may be a little sprinkle of some funding that I may look at of trying to do a grind out on 5th and F. That's where that money comes. After that, that's really it. So it's really like a net neutral where it just pays for us to get by year to year. Hence the reason Road Maintenance and Rehabilitation, SB1, which the state put in place and it was not repealed, where that did allow a little bit additional money to come into the city in approximate $400,000. This would be currently our maintenance of effort, what we are required to match to receive that fund, which is $200,000. And then what we have tracked from 27, a portion of 17 and the full 18, which is roughly about $200,000. So what we're looking at is what do we have from the SB1 funds? I can sit and tell you we're roughly running about close to $400,000 for road improvements. What are we doing with that funding? Well, we're going to be moving forward with slurry seals, crack seal type of work and repairs through the city. In our website, we have a ranking of those particular cities or streets that would be the first up. And I think, you know, for the councilors that weren't here at the time of the decision back in October, was the council gave direction was it'd be best to take those roads that are not at a level of critical nature and protect the roads that need a little bit of type of maintenance. So the decision was made through the council to, in this first round of funding, to go and improve road maintenance with various slurry and crack seal type of asphalt on top of our current better improved roads. And given the cost for a full segment of a block, we realized that there wasn't going to be that funding level that would be there to actually do that type of improvement. But we, I think, in moving forward, recognize that there would definitely have to be a future discussion of once we got a good handle of SB1 not being repealed and in place, and costs for full reconstruction of cities, and have to see if there's the ability to leverage that particular funding and move forward. So I think where I see this particular path of funding moving forward is definitely something that the council needs to explore about leveraging those particular funds to maybe do a more sizable project in subsequent years, and figuring out if we grant fund that, if we take a loan out and back it with the funds that we currently get from this particular funding source. So it's all topics that I believe that maybe in the future we can bring to the table to have that discussion about how we move forward with subsequent road improvements. Would leave you with the note on that topic, which is we completed the 12th and J improvements last year. Just if you go to that segment, which was like a block, probably a couple of blocks, that was, I want to say 1.3 million just for that segment. So it gives you the magnitude and the scale of just how much we're talking here when it comes to full reconstruction of road segments within the city. And given the amount of funds that we actually receive currently is with the MOE and the SB1. So I think, you know, we got some decisions to make moving forward. Last thing I would say is the bike and pedestrian master plan. I definitely would say that that particular document is underutilized. I think that falls into the wheelhouse of having the resources to pull out various particular elements of that particular document and apply them to the city. It's something that I'll endeavor to do and try to move that forward. And I think that those particular projects and elements within the Bike Ped Master Plan are ripe for ATP future funding. And it's just something that I think with resources and timing that has to, I think, be brought to the forefront at some time. Because at this point, we really are sitting, I think, with a pretty solid Bike and Ped Master Plan document that's at this point being underutilized for the various objectives within the plan. And I think we can get some grant funding through sources with the appropriate resources. And then also ADA transition plan. This is a requirement that cities have to maintain a transition plan for accessibility. One thing that will come up with the ADA transition plan in the near future too, and why this is on here, is that when we do go for these federal and state dollars, they are always looking and asking questions related to our transition plan. And when I came to the city, Caltrans tapped me on the shoulder and said, you guys need to really do something with that plan. And I said, fine. Fast forward months, I assumed on that discussion that we had a plan. Well, guess what? We don't have a plan. So we definitely need to get moving on a transition plan. That'll be one item that's going to be plugged into the budget and budget conversation that we need to move forward with creating and developing the ADA transition plan.
Can we take credit for the work being done by Caltrans right now? Along the highway, the new ADA improvements they're making?
It's in the city. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, don't know. But I can tell you, transition plan, probably ballparking anywhere from 80,000 to 140,000 to do a transition plan. So I think we're gonna get tapped. That shoulder tap is gonna happen again, I believe, coming around the corner. So we definitely need to plug that in moving forward. So public facilities and infrastructure, we do have our Department of Water Resources grant, which is our Parks and Well initiative, and that's moving on a timely schedule. We're hopefully having the design work completed in April is what we're tracking. The Community Design and Rural Urban Connection Strategy, that's a SACOG particular grant. What we decided to do with the community design is probably a couple years ago, we went out and secured community design grant funding with SACOG. It was one of their rounds for that year and cycle. And part of that project was to do a parking master plan for the hospital. As I believe most of the council is aware, we carved out that particular funding of that particular exercise, knowing that we were doing a overall comprehensive parking management plan, and we allocated that particular funding towards an economic development activity. And then coupled with the economic development activity is this rural urban connection strategy of funding that's coming to the city from SACOG, where we'll bolt those together, and then we will put that funding towards an economic development strategy that still is yet kind of in the infancy stages, and we're working on getting that forward. The good thing, what I like about the community design grants with SACOG is they give you anywhere from 3 years usually to complete them, so you do have some time, but I get the fact that things catch up to you. So from a priority level, it's something that we know we need to do, and it's coming, and it is part of that. The other thing I would point out, the new cycle of SACOG's community design grant came out, I want to say last November, December. We applied for that, and we did receive $100,000 in grant funding to do rehabilitation modernization for Veterans Park. And so they haven't dispersed that funding yet and gave us the nod to move forward. But part of the exercise after we complete the Parks Master Plan is to turn attention into that funding to do some type of rehabilitation, modernization of that particular park and move that forward. And we're hopeful that we can make that park connection with our relationship with the hospital and pose a frame mental piece with them that we are trying to do something and activate that particular area to hopefully get them to want to move forward on master planning that particular area. So we got that funding coming in, and then the supplemental environmental program. I think as most council know, we had a robust discussion on Alice Lake aeration. That project is continuing to move forward. We're trying to meet the window to get those up in the summer so that we can definitely take the appropriate studies and technical data that we need and within the lake. So things are moving ahead on that front. Jumping below the line, not covered on the top, but on the bottom, we definitely have an age system, and what I highlighted there, what we encounter on a typical yearly basis is we get into a run-in where we do have a mainline type of incident where we have to do a replacement of a stretch of particular main line. Most recently, it was just down the street, just north of 5th Street in the alley, or the street there, that we did some improvement there. These run about 10 to 20,000 per incident, and we do the best to, I think, triage and keep things moving, but we do get hit, with these type of repairs, and it does create a significant cost to the city moving forward with the age of these particular the pipes. So we have the well pumps replacement. What we're doing now is, and what we'll be coming forward with the exercise on sewer and rates, is a highlight of the various wells that need to be replaced and redundancy as well. We definitely could use some backups that we have on the shelf, and we're putting the cost together to pull that together as part of the discussion on the sewer rate study. And then the lift station, what hit the city pretty hard in these high rain events, the last one that we had, was the fact our SCADA system, which basically is the system that talks to all the pumps electronically through the network, had some malfunctions. We had to manually, I think we did provide an update to you that we had to manually sit at the pump stations during this particular event just to make sure that they would turn on and it would actually move flow. So we're looking at various items there of that system to do some updates that also will be bolted into the sewer rate study. And then something that I've been wanting to do, and before we really do anything about what's under the ground, we really need to look at what is under the ground in a sewer master plan, is that document that will detail our network. We definitely have good documentation, but I think, with that documentation needs to be approved and scaled, and then we really need to look hard about how we're going to improve the system. I think the best indication of that is when you have cross laterals going over 3 properties, it's very likely that we are going to be in a situation where we have to carry a naturally modernized system, carry everything out to the street, like I think most cities, and do away with kind of this cross lateral. So that'll be a heavy cost to the city. How are we going to do that? Well, we got USDA funds, we got State Water Resources Control Board, huge, big money type of grants that are out there that can provide that. Prop 6, and I think on that note of those 2 particular funding sources, we have been in dialogue with a consultant regarding the decommissioning of the water treatment or the ponds. And this particular consultant is pretty seasoned at these particular grant sources, so we had a pretty robust discussion with that consultant about these programs, and maybe there's ways to start utilizing these particular grants to benefit of the city. And then lastly, the Prop 68 statewide park rehab. This is a new cycle, and I've mentioned this before, along with Veterans Park. There's other ideas that we want to move forward with tapping into this grant funding. It has a tight window, a deadline of, I believe, July, the end of July, and so I'll be working with a consultant to put that together and get that submitted so we can start implementing some of those objectives within the Parks Master Plan. And so it's got there, and that is it at this point.
Through the chair, real
go ahead.
quick. Do we have a discharge permit for Ellis Lake in the Feather River? You don't have to answer that
Ye-
now, Jim.
we do.
That's a lot on
We
your
do.
plate right now, but would you,
Yeah.
could you let me know that, please?
Yeah.
Also, on the sewer master plan, on the decommissioning of the sewer ponds, has there been any talk what that's going to result in, what that's going to be used for? Or what's our vision for those?
No talk on the vision. We're still stuck on the price tag, right, Ms. Brown? And also what needs to be done and the timing of that and the scale. So we're working on the back end with a consultant to give us a scope and a cost.
Yeah.
I think it's critically important to have that when we go into the sewer rate study, to know that cost and what's really ultimately going to be removal of sludge and pay that cost and boring of soil. So we're working through that, but at this point, all I can tell you is turnaround of that particular site easily anywhere outside of 5 years.
Well, the reason I asked that, I was watching TV on that YOLO bypass. They're using that as a salmon rearing issue, and that was suggested here years ago, that those ponds would be a beautiful place for doing that very thing. And I think with Fish and Wildlife Service and the federal, anyway, the whole problem is those could be used for doing that salmon rearing. So I just wonder if there's any conversation going on what the use is going to be. Because the sludge will go out to Ostrom Road, they'll use that for cover.
Yeah.
But, just a thought.
Thank you.
Another one,
Just-
another thought.
Just real quickly, I wanted to add for the council's discussion, I think I noticed that both you and I forgot that on your list of to-do items, Jim, cannabis ordinance, I just wanted to mention that there are 3 projects currently, two that are underway, different various phases, one that's teed up to be underway, and they will require conditional use permits, which falls in Jim's shop, and that's a considerable amount of work as well. We've heard the council as it being a priority for the council to move forward with the implementation of that ordinance, and so we are pushing hard on that, and a lot of that work falls in Jim's shop.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I think I wrote a couple questions. Let me see if they're relevant. If I could read it, it would have been a great question, but
Mr. Mayor,
hold on.
I have one if you don't mind.
Okay, go
if I
ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know this is probably not something nice to bring up from the way it happened last time, but looking at your full-time employees for the public works staffing, we have one full-time mechanic
Correct.
to keep that whole shop going for the sake of that one mechanic?
Yes.
That can't be too practical, is it?
Just different ways to look at the practicality of that particular position.
Councilmember, the council decided a couple years ago to move away from 2 mechanics because a lot of the work was, that one of the mechanics was specifically doing for the police department, and we went to lease the cars. The plan was that a lot of that, the maintenance was gonna be done through the leasing program. And so part of the cost associated with leasing that was taken from that other mechanic position. So that's why we only have 1 mechanic right now.
No, and I understand that. It just seems like there's gotta be some overhead associated with that, having that whole shop over there with 1 mechanic working out of it.
Well, I think a lot of the work, and staff can let me know, I think, and maybe that's a comparison, how much of that work goes outside, especially for specialized things like our fire trucks tend to go outside.
Already does go outside?
Yeah, currently because, just because of the complexities of our fire trucks and whatever they may be, versus taking care of a lawnmower
Oh, gotcha.
or a backhoe. So anyway, I think that's where the thought was. A lot of the work that's specialized does go, and I may be wrong here. Am I in the right direction there, guys?
In regards to the fire apparatus, John does do a fair amount of service
Oh, does
and
he?
repairs still on our older antiquated equipment because we can't send that old stuff to Sacramento to get repaired. So he still does a fair amount of work for us.
We're probably gonna see something later in the agenda about that, huh?
Maybe.
Yeah. Anyway, but that was the thought, that a lot of it is through leasing and the mains that they provide.
I think I do remember that, hearing that comment on the
Um,
fire
I-
apparatus before.
The over-counter system that you want to improve, are you looking at improving that, like like bringing technology? And does our current ordinances help you with the over-counting system? I mean, I guess it's two things. Does your current ordinances help you with over-the-counter?
Yeah.
And are you looking at like improving technology to do over-counter or online permitting or whatever it may be?
That can be a component of streamline and modernization as well. Yeah. In addition to code modernization, meaning let's move forward with looking at the code and getting, some adjustment on what could be, perceived as antiquated type of zoning and planning, and look at other forms of zoning and utility that are out there. Naturally, form-based code always comes up as a discussion, and that's one part. But then, also the ability to submit online and utilize that type of technology to make it more business-friendlier as well.
Is that something you'll propose, including, in my mind, another opportunity is members of the public be able not necessarily to email you or call you directly, but maybe using some type of online, service, 311.
So you're looking at an online utility type of work order system. That's not included in the modernization. That's strictly on the building side. So are there programs out there? Yes, there are programs out there to utilize.
Are those helpful or not helpful, or?
Yeah.
Let me see. City of Oroville, give me 17 and I'll take that deal. Meaning the challenge with that is you're successful based on what you have as your horsepower to respond. I think that's as clear as it can be. If you have the workhorses, you can respond to those inquiries. Otherwise, things just kind of settle, or they have to go through the process based on.
I hear you, and
Yeah.
I think I remember living in San Francisco, and I think the Examiner used to put Public Works in the front page, who's in charge of that pothole, they actually named the person in the city that needed to take care of that street or something. In any case, but that was interesting. But there's some thinking about the public to have an understanding of what's going on, the amount of work, the time of calls, the type of potholes, trees, trimming, whatever it may be, so they can see, man, they have a long list of things that they need to do. So making sure not only the council is aware of all the things that you're doing, but maybe finding a way that we can make it available for the public to understand the long list that is being, the work is being dedicated to.
Definitely other utility for sure, to utilize it that way. Yeah.
Just a comment following up with what you
okay.
said before you move on.
Yeah.
With these higher tech programs, I know there's a great one too for the building department. You can do all your scheduling online for your inspections and your permits. I know it's all money to get, but something to consider. Our neighbors across the river here have a really nice one where you can go on and put your application and everything for your permit, and then do all your scheduling and nice part of a system if it ever becomes available.
That's something that we need to look into. I think furthermore, making that available to the contractors that are out there, as opposed to in some cases, I have to get my plug in there, bypassing the counter, with definitely every opportunity to get them to, know that the resource is out there, so that they're not bypassing the counter, or they feel that maybe there's a permit is not needed.
But what I'm hearing from you is priority-wise, equipment replacement versus what we just talked about, technology improvements. I mean, you would say let's improve our equipment.
Public services is, I think, mainly, is equipment, and from community development side, with the long-range kind of planning perspective, that is only going to be successful if you have the resources and the full-time employees to pull that off. And then, in regards to the other element of, let me see here, the fleet, already spoke to that, and the roads, which is, how do you want to piece that together? I think we're at a point, and other agencies throughout the region are doing this, which is, okay, we got a full year of SB1 money coming in. What's our path forward? Do we just take that money and, granted, these are larger cities, that getting buckets and buckets of money, which, personally, I think the way they did this is totally backwards, but that's needless to say. But they're getting buckets of money and they're able to piece that funding together to get legitimate projects that, for us, doing a 1.2 million street with only 400,000 isn't, we're not going to be able to get there. So I think what we need to do when it comes to streets is figure out what that path forward is and how do we leverage, SB1 funds and maybe other funding that's coming in from other sources. I would say develop a 10-year plan of what we can do, what we can achieve, because right now they're setting that kind of timeline with SB1 of a 10-year timeline, and then we will refocus. So I think we're at a pivotal point to start having that discussion. I would also say that coming back to you to talk of next year about slurry seals, I feel we should really be talking about how we get reconstruction done within the city in some facet.
And I guess I appreciate this presentation and to kind of share with the public and the council the amount of work that is being done in your department and the important work that is being done in your department, and how disadvantaged your department is in the sense that you have outdated systems, in the sense that, our ordinances are kind of outdated, to our infrastructure being pretty worn out, to putting together some, up-to-date or modernize your systems. That takes a lot of work to kind of get us going, and getting enough resources to actually improve our parks and streets and all those things that make our community better. So I really appreciate this presentation. It did show a lot of that in it. I look forward to hearing your needs during the budget time, how you prioritize that, because I think you need support, and I think the council, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I believe you need the support, and I'll be supportive of seeing how you prioritize, as we move forward.
Yep, thank you.
How many people do we get from the one-stop program?
I believe it's 10, but it flows just based on the people that are coming in, and either priorities by One Stop or other issues where they are not showing up to work. So there's, reliability is up and down.
And how does that cover us when we have that many people? You're able to do a lot more? They're only on parks, or what kind of projects do you have them on?
That's a good question, because what comes with One Stop and their program guidelines is actually monitoring the staffing at One Stop. So when we deploy the crew of One Stop, we have to actually have one of our FTEs supervising the One Stop staff, not the superintendent, but just a regular public works personnel monitoring the work. So in a way, you see where I'm going, you lose somebody that's knowledgeable, seasoned, and they're sitting there just kind of monitoring their staff. So a little, deficiency.
Takes away from some of our efficiency, maybe.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
If I might add to that, being the ex-director of that One Stop, I can tell you how they do it. You keep your eyes open for the counties that are not using their money, and you grab it. And that's exactly what they're doing, and because they don't use it all. And it's under dislocated workers and emergency allocations on the floods. So if we get another high water event next year, it does damage, we'll get some more. But North Central Counties Consortium is the one that applies for the grant to the state, and they proportion it out. Got that?
Any comments and questions? Seeing none, any comments from the, any other further comments, sir?
No,
No.
good.
Any comments from the public on this matter? Okay. Seeing none, is there
I
a
got
public
one.
comment?
Chris?
No. Okay.
This is an auction, you wave your hand, you might
I'm gonna
buy
take
it.
a 5-minute break,
We got one. Mayor,
7:15.
Mayor, we had one.
Oh, sir, you have a comment?
Well, yeah, how long have I got?
3 minutes.
Can I speak at another time?
About this particular presentation, is there a
I'll speak it now, yeah. The funding that's coming forward, I would like...
I'm sorry, you need to come up, I don't know who's speaking, and you need to kind of
Absolutely.
tell your name, sorry.
My name is Mike Farini. I live on 6th Street, 817, and I've been here about 2 years now. Lived over on the other side of the river for about 23 years. So I love Marysville. I really think Jim's doing a great job. I'm a planner myself, so I see what he's doing. He's putting the funding together in the right places. It's awesome. A couple of items, though. I don't think that, you know, the biggest problem I see in the neighborhoods, especially in the overlay, the historic overlay, is traffic. We have, I'm completing, just wrapping up a 4-year traffic study for this area that involves collision data and everything, and I already got the collision data from CHP, so I sent an email out to everybody. We have so much cut-through traffic on our residential streets, and we're going to spend all this money to improve the streets for that traffic, not for our residents, but for that cut-through traffic. That destroys our streets. Frankly, why not just leave I Street, H Street, and all those streets full of potholes, because that's free traffic calming right there. Slows them down. In the meantime, I think we need to put together a program that restricts non-resident traffic in the historic overlay district in the residential areas, and we need to start stepping up enforcement. And part of the problem is our police department spends majority of its time responding to collisions and not out there preventing them. And, you know, that's because we don't get the money from the state, or we don't spend it in the right spot to make sure that this cut-through traffic is being reduced and slowed. A majority of the collisions occur out on the state highway system. Why are we even responding to those? Why isn't the CHP taking them? In 4 years, in 220 collisions, in 4 years, CHP responded to 10 of them. Marysville PD responded to all of them. And that includes our fire and bi-county ambulance. So, you know, that's our problem we're taking on for the state, because the state's running their state highway system right through our town. And the residents are suffering on both sides of the highway because we have 11,000. I did the traffic study, the AADT counts from Caltrans, which were on their website. We have 11 to 14,000 vehicles per day cutting through the historic overlay district daily. On my street, on 6th Street, between I and H, where I live, I did my own traffic count. At peak hour, I get 130 vehicles coming speeding right by my house. And in the 2 years I've lived there, no offense, I've not seen one car pulled over. Not one. And I've witnessed 2 collisions on I Street and 6th. Witnessed. And I'm not there all the time, I work. So I don't know how many collisions happen. Well, I do know how many collisions happen there for. So this is what we're dealing with. This is the reality of what our residents are dealing with every day. We don't have any crosswalks, and I know Jim's working on the walkability and the complete streets aspect of our town, ped and bicycle. I think that's a great idea. We need to slow traffic down. We need to spend money on traffic calming devices, speed humps, road signs. I don't see one speed limit sign on I Street or on H Street. Not one speed limit sign. And you're going to repave I Street? I think you should put up signs and lights and crosswalks, paint crosswalks, and do things. Put diagonal parking in. You narrow the streets, it slows traffic down. I Street and H Street are wide open. They're a freaking highway, freeway. I've seen people going 50 miles an hour down I Street on a weekday afternoon at 4 p.m., 5 p.m., and then slam on the brakes and come around sideways on 6 and speed right in front of my house. Blow the stop sign at H Street, head over to the stop sign, and then run over to 3rd Street so they can get on State Route 70. Are they stopping and spending money in our town? We're putting a traffic committee together. I talked to Bill a little bit by email, so I'd like to get on board with this. I work at Caltrans. I'm a planner. I know the issues. I know what's going on State Route 70 and all that stuff. So I have some really great ideas I'd like to share with the council in the future moving forward. And as we spend this money, I'll continue to stay involved. And everybody here has my email and contact information. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments from the public on this matter? If not, thank you for the presentation. I'd like to take a 5-minute break. Let's see, it is 7:21. Let's come back at 7:26.
He wants to be part of it.
Well, thank you for that break. I needed it. Sir, per your comment, I believe your question about why do we respond to incidents in our state Iowa within the city of Marysville, there's an answer for that, and I'm going to ask the chief. I believe we have to because we're a charter city. That might not be the exact answer. There's probably some legalities behind it, the state and charter cities. So I think that's the reason why CHP does not respond to state highway incidents within the city of Marysville, but I'll make sure I follow up with the chief on that. Sir?
Yes, sir. Whenever a highway runs through a city jurisdiction, that jurisdiction is in charge of traffic for that portion of the roadway.
Okay, thank you. But I think does bring the point that, in a sense, we are covering the costs of state responsibilities, and the state's not willing to pay for that, and we have to kind of respond to it because it could be our residents or visitors or people doing business here. Anyway, thank you for that point. Let's move to item 7, our Community Consent Calendar Forum. I'd like to invite individuals wishing to address the City Council concerning consent calendar items or on matters not already on the agenda. We invite you to make oral comments of up to 3 minutes. When you are called, we ask you to please go to the podium and give your name clearly for audio recording. You are requested to address your comments to the council and not to the audience. We do mention that by state law, the council is not permitted to undertake any action or discussion on any item not appearing on the posted agenda. If you would like a response from the council, we ask you to please fill out a speaker's card and you will be contacted within the next few days. Any members of the public like to make a comment?
Good afternoon, Mayor. I am Stuart Gilchrist, a native of Marysville, California, and a resident and a business owner. And I'm here to discuss 2 issues. Would like to meet with you later to go over the trucks that have gone through the First Street corridor. My team of citizens have taken photographs of these trucks, and I'd like to communicate how to get this information to you. The second subject is that I formed a committee of citizens to assist the department in completing the general plan, return the bounce back with improvements, and augment all of these programs for the purpose of quickly providing a new and improved community for the betterment of all of our citizens' quality of life, including our neighbors and guests. We will require a few brief minutes with all of the heads, even though today's presentation was amazing. And then we would like to respond to the City Council with a plan for further discussion. So we would like to do that as soon as possible. Time is of the essence, and we would like to make all of our inclusive presentation at or before the next City Council meeting. Thank you.
Sir? Any other members of the...
Hi, my name is Ryan Anjadi, and this is my first time speaking. I live in Marysville, 227 8th Street. I'm just here by saying that I see a lot of stuff going on in downtown, homeless people smoking crack, and I go and report it to my friends of the Marysville PD. And let's see, 3 years clean, and I'm just trying to be like a good citizen. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Hi. How's everybody this evening? Good, I hope. What I want to say is, I think I know where I could save you some money.
Your name for...
My name's Brian Lee Brown. I think I know where you could save some money. You might think about hiring an attorney that might be able to litigate civil law. For the past couple of years, I know of a couple instances where we paid 2 attorneys, and I know you can't afford it because you don't have much of a budget, but I don't know if you're aware of how much you have paid your attorneys for any outside litigations of any sort. For an attorney here of the city to represent the city, you should be able to have all facets of your law so that we don't have to hire outside the city. $250,000 in the past 2 years, that's a lot of money. That's somebody that was representing the city should be doing. I mean, I would if I had a city. 98% of the civil litigation for cities is civil law. Why not have somebody that can do that could save you money in the long run? Because paying for 2 of them just for a city this size is not very good at all. And I would also like to know the water waste treatment plant, where the sewage is going. Directly, where is it going? I know it's not hooked up to Linda yet. The Water Resource Board guy says it's not. The Linda Water District is not. So I'd like to know where the sewer water is going. I mean, that's fair. I mean, we drink water, we bathe in water. I just want to know if it's clean. I want to know where it's directed to. I know that they had a piping project a couple of years ago, and they paid RGW $500 and some $1,000 on a contract that they didn't even get to fulfill. It was supposed to do it because it was in the better interest, according to the attorney, for you to opt out of such a deal in law. So I just thought this might be something for you to look at anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. If you want your answers question, you can fill out a speaker's card. They can get a hold of you.
Okay. Yeah, I got one. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments? Seeing none, let's move to item 8. Item 8 are all matters on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and therefore approved by one motion unless any member of the council, city manager first requests that a matter be removed from the consent agenda for separate discussion or action. What's the will of the council?
Approve.
Motion to approve consent agenda items, and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion's approved with a vote of 5-0.
Ordinance number 1414, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Marysville, repealing and reenacting Chapter 5.48 of the Marysville Municipal Code regarding massage establishments and massage therapists. And ordinance number 1415, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Marysville, California, amending portions of Chapter 8.12 of the Marysville Municipal Code entitled Violations, and repealing Chapter 8.13 entitled Violations and Penalties.
Thank you. We'll move to item 9A. This is 2018 progress report for general plan and housing element. It's required by the State of Housing and Community Development Department, also known as HDC, and Office of Planning and Research. This recommendation comes from our Community Development and Services Assistant Director, Mr. Prosser. Sir?
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of City Council. Item before you tonight is the 2018 calendar year General Plan and Housing Element Annual Progress Report. If you remember, approximately 2 months ago, staff brought before you the calendar year 2017 Housing Element Annual Progress Report. Based on some recent legislation, some exemptions that were allotted to charter cities, which did not require the annual reporting, have changed, primarily for housing element for access to state grant funds, primarily SB2, and also a relatively recent legislation change that removes the exemption from charter cities from requiring a general plan annual progress report. So for a long period of time, the city of Marysville was not required to report annually on either the general plan or housing. The state has removed those exemptions, so this is our required general plan and housing element annual progress report for calendar year 2018, which is the first year Marysville is required to do a general plan annual progress report. Again, two distinct reports, one going to the Governor's Office of Planning and Research to discuss our general plan, any policy implementation measures that were done during the calendar year, the planning and land use activity, and any amendments to the general plan will be found within that annual progress report. The other component of the progress report is the housing element, and that is a report on how we are moving forward with achieving our allotment for the regional housing needs assessment and the implementation measures we have identified for this cycle's housing element. So I'd like to summarize a few of or point out a few of the sections of the general plan report. Again, there is no formal template for a general plan annual progress report, but there are sections, a minimum information that is required to be presented, table of contents, a quick introduction, discussion of the city, and then a breakdown of activities to date. One we can primarily focusing on development and land use. So if as staff, we point out the building permits for 2018. We, as a staff, issued approximately just under 500 building permits. Why I wanted to point this out is it was an increase of 73 permits over calendar year 2017. In addition, and what's more important, is that the total construction valuation, so the total cost of the work performed in 2018 over 2017 increased by approximately $70,000. So it wasn't in the increase in building permit fees received by the city, but the work that's being done to improve the buildings in Marysville. Again, planning permits, in addition to the just 500 building permits, the Community Development Department issued a variety of planning permits, both at a staff level and with the assistance of the Planning and Historic Preservation Commission. So the breakdown for last year's calendar year activity for entitlements is there were 9 conditional use permits brought forward for the Planning Commission and 26 design review applications, primarily architectural changes or modifications to residential and commercial structures in our historic overlay district. Their list of the projects reviewed by the Architectural Review Board, a synopsis of the major projects reviewed by the Planning Commission. We did mention, in addition to 2 cannabis ordinance updates that were reviewed by both Planning Commission and ultimately decision by City Council. In addition to the use permit activity, there were no general plan amendments in the calendar year of 2018. Brief discussion of the general plan elements and the implementation measures that are currently in our general plan. There was more of a detailed review of that on a prior meeting with council when we discussed the potential for a comprehensive general plan update, but it just describes the general plan implementation measures for all the 7 elements and what staff has used as a toolbox in their toolbox in determination of approval or recommendation of approval or denial of specific projects. So that is the breakdown of the minimum standards for a general plan annual progress report. For the housing element, you may have noticed that this is a more robust housing element annual progress report. Again, due to certain state legislation last year, a relatively simple report that was prepared each year by jurisdictions. Again, this would be the first mandatory one for charter cities, has turned into a multiple paged document requiring additional details, including specific locations, type of construction evaluation, and activity down to parcel numbers and parcel level data. So the scope of the annual progress report has changed to be more detailed oriented, in conjunction with the governor's desire to see HCD, housing community development, be more of an enforcement mechanism rather than an advisory mechanism on our housing production and housing needs for California. We are, as of last year, one of a good positive sign from last year is we had a construction of 4 new single-family residences, which equaled to the amount of residences that were built by the city of Marysville for the previous 4 years of this 8-year cycle. So from 2013 to 2017, we built 4 houses. In 2018, we built 4 houses, so a total of 8 new residential units in the city's jurisdiction, far below the requirement or the regional housing needs assessment or the allocation that's been provided by Housing Community Development to our regional agency, SACOG, and then distributed through each of the jurisdictions. One thing that you are aware as a council, and what I'd like to reiterate for the general public, is cities don't build houses. Cities allocate land and prepare zoning ordinances and building codes that facilitate the construction of a variety of income levels and types of houses. That our role and responsibility is to ensure that there's land available. The market drives construction, and until that disconnect has been overcome, which we can provide the land necessary for those homes to be built or of a variety of housing types, but the market, it's also having the market to the point where they can begin development and it becomes something that's achievable. And we're seeing a turn right now towards that, where we'll be seeing an opportunity for additional residential development within our jurisdiction and the surrounding community. But for our housing element and compliance with our housing element and compliance with our regional housing needs assessment, we are in compliance with all requirements to date, and I do not see that changing in the near future. And that concludes staff's presentation. Staff is recommending that council accept the report and direct staff to submit to both the Housing and Community Development Agency and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? I had a question. I mean, the stock of types of houses that we have in Marysville. We don't have a lot of growth opportunities. I mean, there's opportunities probably for infills. Is there opportunities for us to take a look at? I know one of the things that they were talking about, opportunities from the state of looking at ways that you can improve or increase housing stock is by adding like in-law units in people's backyards, or reducing, the things that people needed to overcome, or looking at cities that may be able to provide ordinances or laws, around that. Can you maybe give us a sense of what that might look like, or what that looks like in other cities?
So one thing I can advise you on is that that secondary dwelling units, mother-in-law quarters, accessory dwelling units, laws, specifically at the state level, have been ever-changing in the last 3 to 5 years. For a significant period of a local jurisdiction's history, the local jurisdiction was in control of secondary dwelling units or mother-in-law's quarters till about 2004. It was completely under local control due to some input on, and most of the time it was prohibitive for that. The state got involved and started requiring local jurisdictions to open up to the idea of secondary dwelling units. most recently in a 2017 and 2018 state legislature, they created the state accessory dwelling unit ordinance. It is an ordinance that supersedes local jurisdictions, and it relieves a good amount of local constraints to allow the facilitation of these accessory dwelling units, both as parts of modifying the existing footprint of the house and by new additions or detached units, eliminating and minimizing impact fees, making the process ministerial, which means building permit with no ability of the city to have a discretionary decision of yes or yes plus conditions. It's either a yes or no, checking the box decision. It's really taken local regulations and putting them aside to encourage and facilitate accessory dwelling units. We as a city follow that state regulation and encourage and talk at the counter with the citizens who are interested in it and help them facilitate that. We do have applications in right now for accessory dwelling units. They haven't been pulled yet, but we are seeing an upswing in those units. Now, nothing in the state regulations says that a city cannot become more lenient, and what you're seeing right now is in the direction of local governments is creating even easier standards for those units to come forward. Cities are allowed to limit accessory dwelling units to properties where the owner occupies one of the two units, and there's been a desire to relax that so that you could have a property that could rent both of them out rather than having to live in one and rent the other. There are some jurisdictions that are eliminating complete impact fees and waiving permits to encourage the construction of these units, and also eliminating minimum lot sizes to allow any residential zoned property.
What is the minimum lot size, do you know? It's okay, I mean, it's just...
I believe that our local...
most of our yards aren't that big in Marysville, right?
The current city regulation is prohibitive, and the state regulation has relaxed it, but I'm sorry, I don't know what that number is. So our code is outdated, but it is superseded by the state regulations. But I'm seeing other jurisdictions go even lower than that. So right now, it's generally 6,000 square foot lots. Our lots are usually about 5 to 6.
Correct.
And some are going down to about 3,800.
Wow.
With the way they're waiving the administrative stuff, the permits and that, are the setbacks and everything being waived too? Or will they still have to, or do we know that yet?
Oh, yes. The state has provided great leniency towards setbacks. If the existing non-habitable accessory dwelling unit, say you have a shed or a garage detached on your property, and you want to convert that to a dwelling unit, it doesn't matter where that structure sits on your lot, it's now conforming for setbacks for residential. Traditionally, detached garages and sheds have a reduced setback between side and rear property lines. Generically, you usually have a backyard for a single-family residence of 15 to 20 feet. You have 5-foot interior setbacks. You have 15 street side setbacks, where a garage or a detached structure can be as close as 5 feet from that side and rear property line. As long as that structure was legally built, it could be converted into an accessory dwelling unit.
That's with a conversion, though, you're saying. What if it's a new project?
If it's a new project, it has to meet the standards of the existing residence.
Oh, it does, okay.
I have
Now,
a question.
yeah.
Excuse me, I thought I was finished.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that answered fine, thank you.
Land use is a local issue,
Yes.
and the state is superseding our ability to manage our land.
More and more every day.
How can that be a legislative thing? How can, and you're not a lawyer, but it's a rhetorical question. If we're in charge of our land use by a law, and the state's saying you can't no longer adjust your land use, we're gonna adjust it for you through HCD.
Well, yes, you got, beginning with accessory dwelling units and solar access laws, SB 35, which is permit streamlining of affordable housing units where it's by right construction. A city cannot deny it based on its ability to meet its regional housing needs assessment. If you haven't built homes on your own, developers can come in and build them for you at a ministerial act with no discretionary review. There are significant changes in state law occurring now and will be in the near future that will be encouraging jurisdictions to allow for these activities to occur.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Any comments from the public on this matter?
Crazy. Maybe we get 25.
So 2 years ago, I came to the town and I bought a high water Victorian for about 120 grand. And it had a bad foundation and it had termite damage. And so I submitted plans. This is when Rocky was still the building inspector, and I submitted plans to have it raised. And I was going to turn the bottom floor into a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, which is what I'm doing right now. And the lot is 3,000 square feet, so it's a pretty tight lot. And I was putting a garage. I am putting a garage on it, attached to the house itself as well. And the first thing I want to say is that when Jim came on board, he got me approved, and I needed variances on this project because the lot was small, and he got it done for me. So I want to thank the city for doing that, because if I didn't get that, it wouldn't have been cost effective for me, and I wouldn't have built the unit, period. So I'm one of those citizens that's helping the city meet its housing element. And Steve also just recently gave me an address for that bottom floor. Didn't have to, no fuss, no muss, really. I just came in and he granted it. So I want to say that the city does need to take that into consideration. I am operating at a very, very thin return on investment on this project, very thin. And if the housing market goes down, then I'm at a loss. So it's a risk for me, and I'm doing it out of necessity. I can't imagine a developer who is looking at a profit loss statement or a return on investment, making a very calculated decision, wanting to really come here and do that.
So how do we get more opinionated Caltrans planners to buy some more?
I'm working on my entire unit at work, and I've got 2 of them already bought houses here, so we're good.
Thank you, sir.
But it's that ability of the planning department to work with owner builders like myself. I'm doing this project by myself for the most part. I have contractors here and there, but and they've been very understanding. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments on this matter? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion to accept the 2018 General Plan and Housing Element Annual Progress Report.
Make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Hudson, second by Vice Mayor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion's approved with the vote of 5-0. Thank you so much for all this work. I know it took a lot of work. Let's move to item 9B. Did you?
How about 9?
Did you go? No.
We're good, sorry.
9B is consider and adopt the mid-year budget review. Recommendations to consider and adopt resolution 2019-13, approving the mid-year budget and any associated amendments to the budget. This comes from our interim finance director, Ms. Jasinski.
Hello, good evening, Mayor, council members. Right now, I'd like to introduce Andy Heath. He is our financial consultant for the city. He's been helping us with our mid-year budget, also presenting or helping us with our audit and various items in the department. So I will hand that over to Andy.
Thank you, Jennifer. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, again for the record, I'm Andy Heath, financial consultant for the city. You may remember a couple of months ago at the end of January, I delivered a financial model to you. As part of that financial modeling process, one of the things that's actually built right into your model can be your budget. And this year's mid-year budget that we put together actually takes that model and expands that model to include some of the mid-year activity. So I'll be going through that tonight, and as the presentation is going on, if you have any questions, please interrupt me. Staff and I are available to answer those questions. As part of tonight's process, what I'll do is I'll give you an overview of the mid-year budget review process and some of the things that were considered as we went through the two major funds in the city, which are part of this presentation tonight, the city's general fund and the city's sewer fund. We'll also look specifically at the general fund revenues and expenditures and some of the experience that has happened to date for the first part of this fiscal year. And then ultimately what we expect to transpire for the remainder of the fiscal year as it closes out in June. We'll also look at the wastewater fund separately. Then I will update your financial forecast for you. So you remember I brought a financial forecast on January 29th. Your financial forecast has been updated to accommodate some of the changes that we're actually recommending as part of this mid-year process for your general fund, and I'll show you what that looks like. And then some of the things that staff is starting to think about as the fiscal 1920 budget that begins on July 1st, 2019, is being developed and is being considered coming into the future. Looking specifically at the mid-year review process and some of the things that we did look at, we looked at what transpired, or actually what has transpired thus far as part of the audit process for the last fiscal year just completed on June 30th, 2018. The 2017-18 data, when your budget was prepared for fiscal 18-19, the current budget year, had not been completed. So you adopted a budget that considered things that were expected to transpire in 17-18 as far as trends in the things, especially for revenues and certain expenditures that are ongoing revenues and expenditures. However, you didn't know exactly the way they would end up. Now we have a pretty good idea as we're going through the audit process on where 17-18 is going to end. So we've actually updated the 18-19 budget consistent with some of those trends. We looked at the 18-19 fiscal experience to date. So we have a budget to actual report through the month of January 2019 for the first 7 months. We looked at that. And then we made certain adjustments to main operating funds, the general fund and your sewer fund, to account for any one-time fiscal activity that's actually been experienced in fiscal 18-19, things like insurance payments, things like one-time expenditures for unforeseen capital projects when your budget was originally put together. So all those have been added back. And then any changes in estimates based on the availability of updated information. So when your budget was put together before the beginning of this fiscal year for 18-19, we actually didn't know what the ultimate property tax assessed valuation growth might be. So you actually have to guess when you put your budget together. Well, now we know what that is, and we've actually updated the budget to account for what we know in terms of estimates that went into 18-19's budget preparation. Okay, I'm going to move into the general fund now. Looking at your general fund, you can see on the top line, your 18-19 adopted budget had about $9.2 million in revenues and about just under $9.2 million in expenditures. Essentially, a balanced budget came before the City Council for 18-19. When we go through and update the revenues and expenditures for some of the things we're seeing and making a recommendation to the Council for the 18-19 mid-year adjustments, we estimate that the revenue will be about $9.4 million, or about $220,000 higher than originally anticipated at the outset of the budget year, and that your expenditures will be about just under $28,000 more than anticipated as well. Resulting impacts to fund balances, if we build in these adjustments to both the revenue and the expenditure side, and to the extent that these amounts actually come to fruition by the end of the year, as they're discussed tonight, the resulting impact of fund balances will be an additional $192,000 added to your fund balance or your reserves. Going into some of the revenues, real quickly, these are the revenue increases, and I mentioned that the revenues are recommended to go up by about $220,000. Property taxes in lieu of a motor vehicle license fee. This is a portion of the property tax that actually grows with the assessed valuation. We know what that is, so we can add the additional $5,000 to that amount moving forward. Transient occupancy taxes, you have higher than anticipated activity actually going on with your TOT, your transient occupancy collections in your motels to date, so we're adding $40,000 to that. Your franchise fees for Recology are being reduced by $25,000, and that's because if you go down to the second from the bottom line, you see a community partnership fee with Recology for $34,000 being added. So this is kind of a swap, and you're actually going to end up getting more from Recology as a result of that. So that's just a swap in the line item. Fire and related fees and permits, $27,500, a little bit less there. It was anticipated that a staff member would be hired to assist with some of the fire inspections of the businesses and the homes in the city. That hasn't transpired to the extent it was originally anticipated, so we're lowering those fees on that basis. Construction and related permits, similar to many of the cities that I'm actually working with in the state of California right now, there's a lot of development going on. And every time we're updating the mid-year budget, we see just more and more development is continuing. And it's hard to predict that from year to year. So when your budget was put together, it did not anticipate that you would have the level of development that you experience in terms of your collections of permits and fees associated with construction. So we're raising that budget by about $30,000 as well. Refuse lien fees, these were liens placed on the tax roll, $19,000 there. I mentioned the community partnership fees with Recology. Traffic fines, this is another one of those anomalies. All cities' traffic fines, civil fines, and other types of fines just seem to be going up. And I really don't have a reason for that. They just seem to be going up, so we're collecting more revenue there. What?
Left turn on 5th Street.
Yeah.
That's probably
You're in rare form tonight, young man.
Sorry.
Okay, moving on with the revenues, the second revenue page, again, $220,000 more. Facility and other use fees, about $6,500 more there. Motor vehicle and lieu fees, these are just, this is a one-time collection, it comes once a year, $3,795 there. Post reimbursements, lowered that budget. It had a pretty high budget. Typically, post is received as it's available from the state of California and paid to the police departments for applicable police officers and standards training. Reimbursements, just lowered that budget. If it does come in, it just offsets ultimately the training costs associated with that. Typically, when a budget is put together at the outset of the year, you wouldn't budget post specifically because you really don't know if it's going to be available. And then it's added in at mid-year and then as the year progresses. County vehicle abatement revenue, $6,000 there is coming in. County OES fire equipment grant, $5,000 there. We also have other revenues, of which the largest component is an insurance reimbursement related to your fire station and some of the things that were going on at your fire station. So that's why you see that very large number there, $127,489. Again, these reimbursements for insurance cover costs that have already been incurred by the budget. So they were either incurred last year or they are being incurred as part of the budget that's being developed and or updated for you tonight. So that $127,000 is mostly that. And then when you look at all the other line items, all the other 30 line items in the general fund budget, the sum of all the changes is about 3,810 reduction. So those are the major revenue changes that are being recommended to you as far as the general fund is concerned. When we look at the appropriations or the expenditure levels for the general fund that are being recommended to be changed, we're recommending an aggregate of about $27,800 increase in the appropriation budget for the general fund. Looking specifically at different departments in the city attorney's office, the budget was for the retainer only. There have been other legal costs that have been incurred to date that the general fund has borne. So about $21,200 increase there. City council budget, a very minor increase. And I put all the increases on here. Typically, I wouldn't report an increase of this magnitude, but just wanted to make sure that I was transparent in doing so. Just under $1,000 increase to the city council's budget, and that's basically for the council changeover. And there were a council member was paid, 6 council members were paid, I believe, for one pay period or 1 month as the changeover occurred. So this budget accounts for that. Throughout these, all of these expenditure changes, particularly for the departments that have staff in them, there's a lot of workers' comp adjustments that are going on, and these are just ins and outs. It's not that workers' comp costs are going up or down for that matter. It's just that the departmental budgets, when the original budget was put together, it wasn't put together the way that the workers' comp costs are ultimately being distributed, which is the right way that they should be distributed. So where you see workers' comp in the line item, it just means that it's either moving in and out. So as city manager, higher workers' comp offset, which is offset by lower professional services costs, about $2,400 there. The city clerk, all workers' comp, $6,000 there. economic sustainability, and then you see the one below that for planning and zoning. They basically offset each other, and that is because we're reallocating the staff from economic sustainability, where it was originally budgeted, into the community development and planning budget, which is right below that. And then you have some lower professional services to date being incurred in economic sustainability that are actually also moving to planning and zoning. Building and engineering, lower by about $4,500, and these are lower transfers to CDBG. The project is completed, and that's offset by a workers' comp distribution and then lower professional services to date. Parks maintenance, $116,000 increase to the budget there. The original budget did not anticipate when it was adopted the about $120,000 that was incurred for a capital project related to the riverfront park bathrooms. So that has been done, it's been expended, and that's being added to the budget. Fleet, very minor decrease of about $138, all related to workers' comp. Cemetery, $31,200 increase related to headstone replacement costs, not originally anticipated. In administrative services or your finance department, about a $43,000 increase there. You've had some staff turnover there. There have been some staff leave balance payoffs associated with accrued vacation, comp time, and the such that have had to be paid out. You have some workers' compensation distribution, also a budget book printing that was, you have a really nice budget book this year. So that cost is in there, and then you have some lower insurance costs as well. So about $43,000 increase there. Fire department. Fire department has a lower budget by about $70,259. The majority of this is related to vacancy savings. So you have a vacancy, you've had a vacancy over the course of the fiscal year in your fire department, so we're lowering that budget. It's really important to know that although we're lowering the budget at mid-year, especially for staff-related things, this does not change the base for the upcoming year. So when we put the base budget together for fiscal 19-20, and the way your model has been developed for fiscal 19-20 and all future years, it's going to assume that all your positions are filled, okay, including the costs associated with these vacancy savings now that you're seeing at mid-year. Fact of the matter is, if you've had that position vacant for the first 7-8 months of the fiscal year, it's not very likely that you're going to incur those costs anywhere. So that's why we adjust the budget. Let that budget drop to fund balance to give the council the opportunity to use that, perhaps as a one-time opportunity to do something different in the city because of that vacancy savings. So that most of that $70,000 is purely related to vacancy savings. Yep, absolutely.
Also on that, I wanted to say that part of it was when we figured out the budget, when we figure out the budget, we have a spreadsheet that has everybody's health insurance, other items calculated in. When that was originally put in, I actually compared it to, the fire department the budget was extremely high for what our actual cost is for health insurance and those type of needs. So we're not taking away from the fire department in the way of, for staffing. It's just the fact that that line item for benefits was extremely exaggerated in the original budget compared to what it actually should have been. And the worksheets that we have prove that it shouldn't have been that. So it was over-exaggeration that we're also correcting at this time. So just want to let you know that that's what happened there too.
Moving on, general services. So that number, 1,260 in general services, is not correct on the slide. So it should be $95,035 increase instead of $1,260 increase. So the $95,000 increase is primarily related to judgments and damages. There was an IRS penalty that was paid earlier this year that wasn't originally contemplated in the original budget. You also had some LAFCO payments for participation and membership in LAFCO that had to be paid to the county, to Yuba County. And then you also had some other costs related to professional services and development for HDL, which is the city's sales tax consultant, that are added to that as well. So that's what makes up that additional $95,000 for general services as opposed to the $1,260 that's indicated on the slide.
But the bottom line is still 27,000 increase?
The bottom line for general services, that's the same.
Okay.
Yeah, that doesn't change. Yeah, but if you added up all the individual numbers, the way they are on the slides, you wouldn't get 27,000.
Okay.
But if you change it to 20,000.
I didn't add that, but
So, because general debt is the number that should be $1,260. So somehow that got missed when I carried it over. So general debt, basically just increased debt service fees associated with the maintenance of your debt issues that you have in the city. Human resources, lower professional services incurred to date, 13,500 decrease there. Lower repair and maintenance costs associated with information systems, 2,500 decrease there. And then again, like the fire department, the police department also has some benefit savings associated with lower costs of benefits for individuals that are new to the police department, as originally intended or when compared in the budget. So significantly lower costs there, and a lot of the workers' comp cost increases that you're seeing in other departments are actually savings that are in the police department. So that's where that big offset is. And then you also have lower insurance costs in the police department. Dispatch, again, vacancy savings there, about $30,000. Animal services, lower benefits costs, and then there was a CalPERS UAL distribution that was originally budgeted that actually was not distributed to the animal services budget when the CalPERS unfunded liability amortization payment was paid this year. So that's gone.
Is it because that position, that staff was new and they didn't need that type of distribution when it was budgeted?
It was budgeted in another department, so they just didn't have it in that department. So it was fully paid.
Okay.
But just like the workers' comp, it was distributed and ultimately it was paid differently. All right, when we look at what all that means, so if you take all of the revenues that are being recommended and you take all of the expenditure changes that are being recommended, what does that do to your general fund recommended reserves? And keeping in mind that reserves and fund balance are interchangeable. All of fund balance is your fund balance, the difference between assets and liabilities in your general fund. Those fund balances that you have can be set aside in certain reserves. We're going to go over a reserve policy after this item later tonight so that we can talk about what that means. But ultimately, your fund balance at the end of the day will be about $3.3 million in your general fund. Right now, that fund balance, that's if all this comes to fruition. So if we get another 220 in revenue, as recommended above and beyond the adopted budget, and we spend about 27,000 more in expenditures above and beyond the adopted budget, you'll have about 3.3 million in reserves at the end of the day in fund balance. That 3.3 million is made up of restricted cash that's set aside for a specific project and can only be used for a specific project of 742,000. And then unassigned fund balance, which we'll talk about later, of about $2.6 million. That $2.6 million in and of itself represents about 28% of your operating expenditures in your general fund, about your $9 million budget, about 28% of that. So it's a prudent number. All right, moving on to the city's sewer or wastewater operations and the wastewater capital fund. So both funds are combined for presentation purposes. The fiscal year 18-19 budget that was adopted anticipated about $4.8 million in revenue, offset by about $6.7 million in expenditures. Again, this fund has a fund balance, particularly for capital purposes, so there's capital that's actually built into this that was expected to be incurred for the current fiscal year. The estimated amount, not a whole lot of change here. The estimated revenue will be just over $5 million, about a $229,000 difference, and no change in expenditures. So when we looked at the expenditures, everything's tracking normally, and there's an assumption being made that the capital project that is budgeted as part of the sewer fund this year will actually come to fruition. To the extent it does not, it will likely be carried over into the next year, and you just won't spend the money this year. You'll just move that over into next year as well as a rebudget. So at the end of the day, however, assuming that you make the $5 million in revenue and you spend the whole $6.7 million on the expenditure side, including the capital project, your fund balance on June 30th, 2019 will be about $1.8 million in the sewer fund, and that includes an $800,000 rate stabilization reserve that's set aside or specifically assigned for that purpose. And we'll talk about what those categories of reserves are when we go over the reserve policy. Just some budget notes. The revenue, the increase includes a receipt of just over $200,000 for a Yuba County Water Agency grant, and then some other minor adjustments to interest and miscellaneous income. Again, no expenditure adjustments are recommended. Any capital that is not spent this year will be carried over into next year, and that's the assumption being made. All right, so moving on, going kind of back to the general fund and looking at exactly what transpires when we look at the model and an update to the model. So you'll know that the model put together a base forecast, base meaning we're taking out as much of the one-time stuff on both the revenue side and the expenditure side as possible, so that we can see exactly what it looks like going into the future to provide a defined level of service that is defined by your fiscal 18-19 budget as being recommended at mid-year tonight. This is what the model looks like. For this year, there'll be about a $220,000 surplus. Again, this is because of the mid-year adjustments that we're putting in. But moving into 18-19, 19-20, 2021, and 2022, 21-22, you see there's minor deficits there. And again, these are just base budget deficits. Doesn't mean this is actually going to transpire. It just means staff has to work to prepare a balanced budget for you to ultimately adopt in 19-20 that won't have the use of a $91,000 funds or reserves. So that's coming. But after that, you'll see starting in 22-23, the red numbers become black, and you have a $200,000 surplus, and it systemically goes up each year. This is because of one reason and one reason alone. It's essentially because in that year, 22-23, there are two components in your public safety retirement, CalPERS, amortization costs that actually drop off a little bit. So something becomes fully amortized, most likely a side fund that you've been paying on for many years, that now that you've been paying that off, the debt service on that actually decreases as part of that liability. So that is basically the only difference between 21-22 and 22-23. Plus you have systemic revenue growth over expenditure growth, meaning the revenues and the growth in those revenues that are built into the financial model actually eclipse the expenditures and the growth in the expenditures that are built into the model on the expenditure side. Keeping in mind, however, the model starting in 19-20 does not include any increases to salary. So there are no increases to salary that are built into this. There are for benefits and the increase for potential increase for health costs and such, but as far as salaries are concerned, there are no salary increases built into this to not get ahead of the council on that decision. Looking at your fund balance over time, this is your unassigned fund balance. So we talked about that fund balance in the general fund being $3.3 million, but about $740,000 of that is restricted for a project. This is your unassigned fund balance. So your unassigned fund balance and then a percentage of expenditures for that year as forecasted moves from about $2.6 million in 2018-19 down to 2.3 in 21-22, and then grows to just under $4 million in 25-26. This, of course, assumes that all the assumptions that we've made as part of the mid-year, and more importantly, as part of the model, come to fruition. So that's all a moving part. The model, like a budget, is only as good as the day it's prepared on. Okay, it changes every day. So got to really keep an eye on this stuff, which is why you should update this model frequently so you can see exactly, where you'll be going in the future. So your percentages go from 28 to 24 and then up to 37% of your expenditure base. CalPERS costs, this has to be added. CalPERS arguably is the single biggest cost driver that is confronting cities in the future. Just reporting on this, so this is the update. This probably hasn't changed too much from when you saw it on January 29th, but you can see CalPERS costs grow from 1.2 million in the city's general fund in 18-19 up to about 1.6 in 21-22, and then come down a couple $100,000 after that and remain fairly stable. Hopefully this holds true, but there's a lot of moving parts in CalPERS right now. Okay, you've got an amortization policy change that's coming into effect next year that essentially reduces the way CalPERS amortizes gains and losses and changes in assumptions to everybody's pool over time from 30 years to 20 years. When you pay a house off in 20 years as opposed to 30 years, your mortgage payment is a little bit higher. So that's going to impact all cities moving forward. Hopefully CalPERS has got it right and they built that into the actuarial reports, which We used the most current ones when we put this together, and they've got that right so that, we don't miss too much there. Also, CalPERS had a negative return for calendar year 2018. The CalPERS return on its investment portfolio for 2018 was minus 3.5%. Now, CalPERS does their actuarial reports based on a fiscal year. So hopefully, from January 1st to June 30th, the market can come back a little bit, and all the other investment alternatives that CalPERS invests in will come back a little bit as well, so it mitigates that negative return that transpired in 2018 calendar year. That remains to be seen. To the extent CalPERS does not make its discount rate, you can expect slight increases, not massive increases, in your unfunded liability amortization payment, but ultimately over time, to the extent CalPERS doesn't make their discount rate, everybody ends up paying more long term. All right, so some of the factors affecting fiscal 1920 as staff begins to look at preparing the budget for the coming year. In the economy, I just put continued growth. We're not seeing a downturn. You saw some of the development numbers that are being recommended to be increased. Property values continue to rise. Your property taxes continue to go up. TOT is out there, so the economy is still moving, but we need to keep in mind that this nation is in the longest post-recession recovery that it's ever experienced in its history. So something's going to give at some point in time in the future. How much it gives remains to be seen. May not be a huge recession like we experienced in 2008, 2009, but it could be a stall where you're not seeing growth. Not negative growth, but you're just not seeing growth. So to the extent that occurs, that ultimately impacts your revenue base and where that revenue base ends up going. So keeping in tune with exactly what's going on in the economy, both locally, statewide, and nationally, is very important. So tempered optimism will be used when we prepare the budget for 2019-20. Rising retirement costs, we talked about that. Focus on council priorities. Your city council has numerous priorities that it would like to follow up on. Talked about a lot of them tonight. So the budget, when we put the budget together, we'll actually consider many of those priorities. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, just a continued update of the comprehensive general fund forecast to assure maintenance of long-term fiscal sustainability. So what we're asking tonight, it's recommended that the City Council adopt the revenue budgets and expenditure appropriations for the city's general fund and wastewater operations and capital funds consistent with the changes that are recommended as part of this presentation and the handouts that you have. So with that, staff and I would be available to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
On the general fund financial forecast,
yeah.
what is accounts for the drop in balances and revenues for those three?
Increasing PERS costs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For the most part. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Going back on the CalPERS, earlier when you were here, we were discussing doing the bond on all the liability.
Right.
So, and I think you had said that their discount, they were going to lower the discount because they didn't think they could
They're in the
reach.
process of lowering that discount rate from 7.5% to 7%. Next year, and they've worked that in to the actuarial reports that are prepared for every city. Now, there's also discussion, however, that they may lower it further. Okay, so it's going to be 7% next year. It's 7.25, I believe, this year. It's going down to 7. It's been a 3-year decrease from 7.5. 7% next year, but I am hearing speculation, nothing's written in stone, that they are considering lowering the discount rate again.
And you didn't sound like you were comfortable that you thought that that would get met. And the reason I'm asking is if we do go with a bond to finance the liabilities, are we going to be looking at another chance of ending up with another negative liability?
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
Are we going to, when we bond, we sell bonds for the
right.
Older stuff, you didn't sound like you thought they were going to make their discount. Maybe I just read that into
right.
you. And so then we would end up with another deeper, a second liability that separate from what
correct.
we funded with a bond.
That's correct.
And that is what you are feeling it could go that way?
Yeah, when you bond for a certain period of time, you're bonding for the liability as of that date.
Right, I know.
And to the extent CalPERS misses its return for successive years after that, you have another liability. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Moving target, man.
That's scary.
So after all that, through the chair, after all that good numbers and stuff, what's the bottom line?
What's the bottom line?
That's a good term, isn't it? Is that economic term?
You know, you need to keep, it's a moving part, okay? Like I said, and this is why I say it to everybody I give this presentation to, a budget and a forecast and what you present to a body is only as good as the day that it's presented. Something may have changed between a week ago when I had this done and today that will ultimately impact that bottom line. That's why it's very important to continue to focus on the big picture from a fiscal perspective, look at everything that's going on around you, understand exactly what's transpiring in all of your departments, and you know, it's a very time-consuming, but you just got to get out there and understand exactly what's going
See,
on.
a budget's not etched in granite.
But,
you know, it's a moving target. You adjust it, whatever, to the issues.
Can you speak on the microphone for?
I am.
Your city, the city of Marysville is sustainable at this point from a purely fiscal perspective. Operationally, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So that's what we really got to think about.
Any other questions? You didn't take Measure K revenue into your projection. Measure K dollars, cannabis business dollars.
Okay.
F, sorry. K is the other, it's the county, I'm sorry. Sorry. You didn't take on Measure F.
So to the extent those come in, that changes your forecast.
But those weren't included in your analysis?
No.
Okay.
No.
We just received our first payment of that today, so we weren't able to actually.
No, I get it.
Yeah, but just for the general knowledge in the room, that it was just received today.
Did you
so.
see my response better than the?
I did. And remember, we did not budget for it, and since this is a mid-year
Yeah.
budget, he's just responding to what was in the budget. I didn't budget for Measure F last year.
Correct,
so.
thank you. And I guess that's where your question comes in. I mean, our decision on where we go on refinancing our PERS unfunded portion of it. I mean, do you know what we owed 2 years ago on our unfunded? You had 1.2 in 18, but do you know what it was? It's about 600.
Yeah.
So we've actually almost doubled it in a couple of years. We went from about 600, 800 to now 1,200, and it's going to go to 1.4 and 1.6 and so on, and then we drop off one debt, and then it's going to kind of even out. So I just kind of give you a sense that we've jumped pretty quickly in the last few years, and it would have been about $600,000 that we would have been in the hole without the current sales tax measure that we passed.
Well, doesn't that, excuse me, through the chair, doesn't that unfunded liability have a lot to do with the retirees? Because it's unfunded, we don't have it put in the bank, and we get a mass exodus of people retiring, and the liability's got to go up. Bottom line, yes or no?
I mean, ultimately, the actuarial report is put together to consider all of that. So it takes how many people are on active rolls, it takes how many people are deferred. In other words, they've left the city and haven't retired, but they have something coming. And it takes the longevity assumed for the existing retirees, and it tries to build all that in. When CalPERS goes in and does their assumptions changes, which I believe is every 4 years, they actually go in and they look at how old people are living, and they raise that every time they do it. Okay, so if a male is projected to live 79.8 years and it moves to 80.3 years, well, believe it or not, that 1/2 a year is significant to the bottom line. It's significant to the computation. So if people are living longer, it's going to change the impact of what's going on here. Similarly, CalPERS will look at what people are retiring with in terms of payroll. CalPERS tries to build into payroll. Well, they do build in their actuarial reports 3% per year. So their actuary report assumes that every organization in the state has a 3% payroll growth every year. Okay, and payroll growth is different for everybody, but it does assume that. So there's a lot of moving parts in this as well.
I guess I just want to also focus on the fact that the projection of 2021 and 22 with those decreases of about $300,000.
Right.
If everything doesn't change, those dollars would be made up by our reserves.
If it came down to it, yes.
Right.
Yes, those red numbers, if everything panned out exactly the way it is in the forecast, would have to be made up with reserves.
And
would be balanced
so
by
any
reserves.
deviation from that, hopefully is less, but it could be higher, and we still have to be able to maintain, if we want to maintain the same level of services, we have to be able to cover for those 3 years about $300,000 or so from somewhere to maintain the level of services.
Yes, as of the date this was prepared.
Correct.
Yes, yeah. And keep in mind that this model is prepared conservatively, purposely so. I forgot to mention that. So from a revenue perspective, we're not purposely overestimating what we think revenues growth might be. So from a property tax perspective, the estimate is 2%. Well, we know we've been making more than 2% for the last few years. Now, can it keep up? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, but as far as the model is concerned, it estimates 2%. On the expenditure side, it has CPI factors built in for the general types of expenses that you incur in the city: supplies, materials, contracts, utilities, and such. The only thing that's not built in on the expense side is labor, pure labor, salary increases. Benefits are, labor is not. CalPERS is all in here. It's just that labor is not, because I don't like to get ahead of the council on assuming in a forecast that there's going to be X increases over time. That's the council's purview.
Thank you.
So it's conservative. It's very conservative.
But even 2 on an average over the next 7 years seems to be pretty fair in a sense, because there might be a downturn and the average may be 2 or 3% in the next of growth on average.
You have to watch for that downturn and the ultimate impacts on this, yes. Hopefully, from a conservative perspective, we've built this model such that it can withstand a downturn. And when you do the adjustments to the conservative model, it doesn't impact it significantly.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Beddick-Foley, were you referring to the pension obligation bonds? When you're bonding for that, are there 2 different types of bonds that we were discussing in that earlier conversation? There was the pension obligation bonds, and was there another type, or are they all the same for addressing the PERS debt?
For the pension obligation bond, or that's, no.
Okay, so we're
that's
talking
different.
about the same.
Yeah, that's outside.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if you did a pension obligation bond, ultimately what would happen is this slide would change, okay? But the majority of what's going on with this slide would be replaced by a debt service amount that you would be paying over the next 20 or 30 years, however long you do the pension obligation bond for. So the savings is the difference between what you save in this chart and what you actually pay, which hopefully is less in that pension debt that you would incur doing a bond.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Any comments from the public?
I have a question regarding, I'm Stuart Gilchrist. I have a question regarding the amount of the check you received recently, you was mentioning from the cannabis business? I'm naive, so I'm not quite sure. Are you able to disclose what that was, that amount?
I believe it was about $3,100.
$3,100, okay.
That was for the month of February, and then there was a little bit of amount for January, and that was $573 for, because they opened up the end of
Great, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, if there's no further questions or comments, I'd like to entertain a motion to adopt Resolution 2019 approving the mid-year budget and any associated minutes to the budget as presented.
So moved.
Motion and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion is approved with a vote of 5-0. Thank you so much. Now let's move to item C, consider and adopt reserve policy. The recommendation is to consider and adopt Resolution 2019-14, approving a general fund reserve policy for the city of Marysville. This comes from our city manager, Ms. Brown, and I imagine with the assistance of Mr. Heath.
That's correct. Andy's actually going to present on the majority of it. Thank you, Andy. But I just wanted to tee up the conversation because the new council might be wondering why this is coming before you. When I first arrived here 15 months ago, there was a very strong interest in developing a reserve policy. The city did not have one before, potentially tonight. And so this would be developing a reserve policy for the city for its general fund. And I'm going to let Andy walk you through it. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Marty. Again, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Again, for the record, Andy Heath, fiscal consultant to the city. Purpose of this item tonight is actually to recommend that the city council adopt a reserve policy. We alluded a little bit to reserves and what is made up of reserves when we went through the previous item on the mid-year budget, particularly as it relates to the general fund. This policy is going to focus tonight specifically on the general fund and some of the things that you may want to consider as you move forward with the general fund from a reserve perspective. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to implement a policy establishing a target minimum level of a designated or committed reserve of fund balance in the city's general fund. The reasons why you might want to do this is to mitigate financial impacts associated with an unforeseen disaster or catastrophe, to really mitigate the impacts that you would otherwise have on levels of service that you would have to cut immediately if you didn't have such a reserve available. Mitigate financial impacts associated with a changing economy. The mayor asked a little bit just a few minutes ago about what it means to fund those red numbers that you actually see that ultimately could become more red over time in a forecast to the extent you have a downturn in the economy. Ultimately, this reserve would be set aside for that as well as an economic contingency reserve. And then probably most importantly, what a reserve policy like this does is it really demonstrates the City Council's commitment to fiscal prudency in setting a policy that recognizes that you are paying attention to exactly what's going on from a fiscal perspective and that you have something set aside in the event an economic downturn transpires or you have some sort of a calamity that ultimately will require some level of funding to get through it. So that is the purpose. Some of the guidelines that kind of promulgate why and how you should set up a policy like this. There's two things that are going on. One of them is the General Government Finance Officers of America, the GFOA, actually has a set best practice where they say that you should have, all cities should have, organizations should have 2 months of reserves, 2 months of operating expenditure set aside in such a reserve. 2 months is about 16 to 17%, depending on the way you look at it. So having that set aside, again, from a best practices perspective, the GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association of America, is actually saying that that's a good thing. Also, GASB Statement Number 54, and GASB stands for the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, actually sets forth the way fund balance is stratified and the different types of fund balance that you have. One of those fund balances is a committed fund balance, which is what we're discussing tonight, where the City Council, by some formal action, through a resolution or otherwise, actually commits a portion of fund balance into a committed reserve and can actually only take that out of that reserve with another action. So before you would ever use a reserve like this, you would actually have to take some sort of an action and that's what this policy is recommended to do for you. So this policy specifically recommends establishing a 20% committed catastrophic and economic contingency reserve. So that's what we're calling it in this policy. It can be called a number of things, but catastrophic and economic contingency reserve seems to capture the essence of what you would be setting that money aside for specifically. Establishing a 20% minimum with the goal of attaining 30% at some point in time in the future. Having a 30% reserve is obviously better than having a 20% reserve, but having a 20% reserve Number one, it meets the GASB 54, statement number 54's suggestion that you have a fund balance policy with a committed reserve, and then more importantly, it allows you to meet the GFOA's best practice requirement that says you should have a minimum of 2 months set aside. You'd have a little bit more than that with 20% out the gate. So I talked about GASB 54 and the different types of fund balances. I want to go through all 5 of those different types just real quickly. The first type is a non-spendable fund balance. And by the way, all of your reserves, all of your fund balance in every fund is classified in one of these 5 areas, okay? It has to be consistent with GASB 54. Non-spendable fund balance just means that. So non-spendable means it's things like inventory. Inventory is an asset. Okay, on the other side of that equation on the balance sheet is fund balance. So you have inventory and fund balance. Well, you can't spend inventory. Okay, it's not liquid, it's not accounts receivable, it's not cash, it's not available. Okay, so you have to classify some of your fund balance as non-spendable to the extent you have inventory and the such. Restricted fund balances are purely restricted typically by enabling legislation, where you have things like gas taxes. So in the gas tax fund and your transportation funds, most, if not all, of the fund balance that's actually in those funds can only be used for transportation purposes, for very specific purposes. Therefore, it's restricted. It's not discretionary. Then you have committed fund balances, which is what we're talking about with within the essence of this policy. Committed means the council is committing it to a certain purpose. You actually have to use it for that purpose, ultimately, unless you uncommit it and put it into something else. Assigned means you have fund balance that's set aside for an intended use that's not totally committed. Assigned would be for things like encumbrances, where you have encumbrance carryovers, rebudgets from one year to the next. Well, if you rebudget something, you got to reserve a portion of fund balance that will take care of that rebudget. Because if you didn't spend it in the prior year and you're moving it to the next year, what you didn't spend is dropping the fund balance, so now you've got to reserve it over here as an assigned fund balance. Capital projects typically are assigned as well. If you have some special capital thing that you want to do in any particular year, you may want to assign a portion of fund balance specifically for that. And then you have unassigned. So anything that's not non-spendable, not committed, not restricted, and not assigned is actually unassigned. And that's your discretionary fund balance in the general fund. We were talking about the $2.5 million a little bit earlier tonight. That unassigned portion, that is your unassigned portion. So what we're asking with this policy is to actually take a portion of that $2.5 million that is all unassigned right now and actually moving it over into that committed reserve consistent with the policy, which would be about $1.82 million if you look at your budget today. So the $2.5 million minus the $1.8 million leaves you about $700,000 that would be in your unassigned balance from year to year, consistent with the model today. So mentioned the $1.85 million. So this reserve serves to help the city mitigate the impacts of unforeseen events, impacting the city's ability to fund and provide services. So having this reserve set aside really demonstrates fiscal prudency. Should something happen in the city of Marysville, a catastrophe, or should you have an economic downturn of some sort, this is your go-to pot. Okay, it's what you would go to really allow you the time as a city council and allow staff time to really come up with a plan to mitigate the ultimate impacts that may be prolonging. Okay, there may be several years like the last recession we just experienced, where numerous organizations had to go through downturn after downturn after downturn after downturn in response to the decrease in revenues that was being had. Having a reserve set aside like this will allow you to really mitigate those ultimate impacts in service by having those funds available and allow you time to think about how to raise additional money and or how to continue providing services maybe more efficiently or effectively, so into the future. So to the extent that any committed reserves are used consistent with this policy, one of the things in the policy actually states that you'll come up with a plan to refund that 20% level over the next 1 to 5 years. So once you pull that money out, you almost instantaneously have to have a conversation about, okay, how are we going to replenish that reserve? What's the plan to do that? So that you demonstrate again that you're trying to get back to that 20% level. So with this policy tonight, staff is recommending that the city council adopt a reserve policy, a general fund reserve policy, place 20% of the operating budget into that reserve right now, with the goal of trying to get to 30% in the future, consistent with a lot of the modeling and a lot of the operational things that have yet to be discussed with the budget and otherwise, and move forward with that. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Through the chair.
Yes, sir.
You said that it takes an action to get money out of this catastrophic issue. Is it prudent to have a 4/5 majority vote of the city council rather than 2/3 to do that? I need to get up here, excuse me.
Sorry.
Right now, if this is approved, it'll take 2/3 vote of the city council to change it, to draw the money out.
Right.
Majority.
Majority, simple majority. Would a 4/5 vote be more prudent than that and more stringent?
It could be. Sometimes that could make it a little more difficult in certain situations. I've seen it done both ways, though, where you have it with a 4/5 vote or where you have it with a majority vote. So that's at the purview of the council.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it, the ease of getting money out of here with a 2/3 vote versus a 4/5. Right. And this
Not
is supposed
2/3,
it's
it's majority.
It's a excuse me, 3/5 of the city council.
3/5, yeah. Would take 3 of you.
Mathematically.
Yep.
Now, if 4/5 would make it more difficult to take that money out, and I think that's more of a prudent way of controlling that particular reserve contingency.
Certainly could be. Yeah.
So that would require an addition to this, if that's what the council wants to do, instead of having a 20% and be able to, you said you had to vote it out. Something has to happen to get it out of there.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody said what that something is. So you say you have 4 people here, one's missing. Guess what happens? You got 3 and 1. Or if you got 3 people here, that's a majority. 3, they can change it. And that has happened before.
Yeah.
So anyway, just a thought. What's your feeling on that?
Right. And like I said, I've seen it both ways.
Yeah.
The way this is drafted is a majority,
Yeah.
so which would be a quorum and a majority of the quorum.
That should be.
Right.
So that would be a change that I would recommend.
Oh,
on this.
absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If the council.
Through the chair.
Yes, sir.
I mean, with respect to what you're saying, Bill, I get it, but I mean, a simple majority, we've never had reserves apparently.
I'm sorry?
We've never had reserves apparently here in the city of Marysville, is what I'm understanding from the historical point of view.
Well, we've had them, but they spent them.
We've had them, they spend them, hopefully.
Well, I don't think we had a
judiciously
policy.
There was no
We've
policy.
never had a policy that described it this way.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, the point of contention you have is just that whether it be a simple majority or a 4/5 majority is what you're asking?
What I'm saying is, if you have 3 city council members present, you could float that out and have that reserve tapped into when 2 members are missing. With a 4/5 or a supermajority, that would not be the case. I'm trying to figure out how, I think back to some of the expenditures this city's made in the past and how we've made those expenditures and the money we use to do that. It seems to me like we'd be very cautious of how we handle this reserve and making sure that it's protected from those type of actions. Because this is in perpetuity. You can change it, but why go through all that when we can say, okay, it takes a supermajority of the present members?
And I might suggest that in the GFOA best practice, the recommendation, it discusses something like that, where it says that although it's a 2-month minimum that they're recommending, every city is going to have different circumstances, which includes different political considerations, okay? And that's actually in there, that you may want to have more than 2 months. So instead of 16 or 17, you may want to have 25 or something like that. So that's how that GFOA recommendation deals with that, but you could certainly deal with it the way you're suggesting as well.
The city councils come and go.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just reading the conditions that are in this policy. about why we would take any money out of there. So I'm wondering if we agree on these conditions and future councils agree on these conditions, you might not necessarily have to change the voting ratio on it. So if we agree, should a catastrophic event occur, or that there was, a natural disaster, the economic contingency reserve would provide necessary coverage for basic operating expenditures, including salary and benefits for safety and non-safety city employees for approximately 60 days or more.
Vice Mayor, where are you reading that?
I'm reading on the policy.
I know, what
under
page is it?
catastrophic and economic contingency reserve. So that's what we're talking about. And that would be the one that we're talking about having to vote to take money out of, right?
Right.
Right, okay.
I'm sorry, ma'am, are you looking at page 2?
I'm on Exhibit A, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Exhibit A,
Page 2?
and it's page 2,
Okay. Committed fund balance?
committed fund
Okay.
balance. Yeah, so if we agree to those conditions, those would be the conditions that we would want to spend money from that account, then I would think that we're agreeing ahead of time for what those things are expended for. Maybe we don't need to change
Okay.
to 4/5. I don't know, that's just a thought.
Let's maintain, almost 2 discussions happening. Let's get a sense, a consensus, if we agreed on, the policy points of having, a reserve, and it'd be 20%, and that we want to meet, and we want to get it to a 30%, that overall the policy itself is a good thing, and then let's talk about whether we want to add an additional barrier to remove funds from that fund. But I'd like to take those 2 separately.
Can I make a suggestion, Mr. Mayor?
Well,
Don't you think you get a motion and a second before we start doing that?
No, I just want to hear a consensus, see where folks are.
That's different.
Thank you. Go ahead, Bruce.
I need to ask more questions.
Yeah,
first.
yeah,
I wanna
absolutely.
make sure
Thank you.
Before we start doing that. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right. So we're currently at a 28%?
You're about 27, 28%, correct?
Okay, so we're looking to increase right now at a 3%, basically.
Well, I think the question is,
Just to 20.
To increase by 20?
No. To take 20 of the 28 and put it in this committed reserve.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we need to get a
Well,
motion.
sir,
Mayor, we're out of order.
Sir, no, you're not, I'm
That's
getting,
the
we're asking
parliamentarian.
questions to clarify.
Ask
I'm
the
allowing the
parliamentarian.
council to ask questions to clarify, sir.
Well, yeah,
We don't
but-
need a motion for that.
Ask the parliamentarian.
They're asking questions to clarify their memo and presentation. That's allowed.
Once the questions.
Correct, we're not done with
Well,
questions.
okay, I thought you were asking for a motion to approve and then discuss. is
I
what
didn't
thought
ask
you
for a
were doing.
motion.
Okay, excuse me, I apologize. Big time.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm still not quite understanding here. We're at a 28% or 27, you want to move 20% to this, but the goal would be then to raise a total of 30%.
The goal ultimately would be to attain 30% at some point in time in the future.
Right.
Okay, longer term. But to take 20 today, or whenever you adopt this policy, or
Right.
whatever the council's purview is of the percentage, take 20%, consistent with what the policy is discussing, of the 28% and set it aside in the committed reserve.
Okay, oh, into the committee, okay. But to grow to a 30 is what we would want to eventually
Yeah,
shoot.
20 minimum, and that's what we're discussing today, right?
And how do we determine how much is committed each year? Just what's available? Or do we set a precedent of what we want to increase by? I mean, that's going to be based on the budgeting.
That's correct. I mean, every year we would present during the budgeting and mid-year budgeting presentation on projected revenues and expenditures, as Andy discussed earlier. And then based on all the expenditures, if this policy was approved, we'd be putting aside the committed 20% and building a budget based on the rest of what's available in the general fund and
So
wastewater
my question
treatment.
then is, are we, if we're doing that, once we pass this, that 20%, we have to stay there and we have to build our budget without touching that?
Well, tonight, what's being asked.
If it's approved.
if the policy's approved, you're not actually approving to do that yet. You're approving the policy, and then we would come back and actually set aside the committed funds. Tonight, you're just approving to say, we want to do this.
Structure.
The structure itself, yes, exactly. We would come back, and, I would probably recommend doing it during the budget season, because we're like, 10 minutes away from that.
Right.
And start that, at that time, building the budget, if this was approved tonight, with the idea that we would be doing the 20% minimum, and then building the rest of the budget around what's left over, basically, or uncommitted.
Right.
So, that would be, and we would come back with that to the council in June.
So just as a follow-up to that comment, the budget process could include kind of an update to where we anticipate fiscal 18-19 to end up. As part of the budget process, that's what's typically done. And with that, tell you exactly what that 20% looks like, or what any number looks like in terms of the reserve.
Thank you.
I guess I just want to add, we basically right now, we have these dollars that haven't been spent or assigned. And that's the way I'm thinking about it. And we have no structure to assign this unspent set of dollars. This policy, the hope is that we'll create that structure, that house, or that pot, that we'll be able to assign some of the unspent dollars. Right now, we have about 28% not spent or unassigned. And so during the budget, what we can say is, let's assign the 1.5, whatever it may be needed, to have our fund fully funded, our reserve fund fully funded. There's still going to be dollars unassigned. There's still going to be some gap unassigned that we can use to fill other gaps, to improve services, whatever it may be. And I think the name Catastrophic and Economic Contingency Reserve makes sense. One, we're in a floodplain, we had fires, there could be things that happen to our city and our infrastructure that we're going to be able to go back and say, does it meet this condition? And then we'll ask a question to the council, can we take some of those dollars to pay for some of this, some of the structural damages that might have happened to our city, or if there's an economic downturn where we have to want to maintain the same level of services, the council will be asked, can we take some of those dollars into our set of services pot? So what we don't have is a structure. And so that's what we want to kind of create today. If we vote on it, is create a structure. I had a question about what you said about having day-to-day funds available for city to do their jobs. I mean, what gap would that,
All of these funds, okay, regardless of their fund balance designation, can be used for cash flow purposes to fund the day-to-day operations. One thing to keep in mind is that with any city, especially those cities on a teeter plan like yourself, where you receive property taxes only twice a year, which arguably is the largest source of revenue you might receive, that money ultimately only gets collected in January and May of every year. So for the first 7 months of the fiscal year, you're burning the cash that you have. That cash is in a lot of different types of reserves. You're not spending your reserve on an appropriation basis, okay? You're only using that cash temporarily until you get the cash from the property taxes.
So that's allowable?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Your operational cash flow is fine.
Okay.
You'll have that.
So, but what happens if we get less than what the state said that we're going to give us?
Sorry?
Let's say that the allocation is less than was projected by the state, and we don't get the full allocation, and then we use some of this reserve fund. At that point, then we have to make an adjustment and say,
You could.
We actually have to use,
You could, absent anything else being available, yes, you could. You could.
I guess that was it's not stuck somewhere where our day-to-day stuff is not, somehow it's not gonna not keep going because we can't touch that. That our staff will be able to continue doing the day-to-day
Yes,
stuff.
absolutely.
And to use it as in a sense, day-to-day. But at the end of the day, at the end of the year, we better still have that 20% if it wasn't allocated somewhere else.
Absolutely. On an appropriation basis, you will have that set aside until you unappropriate it or appropriate it to something else. Yes.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
If we wanted to determine a certain amount, if we have, depending on whatever surplus we have, a portion of that would go to debt reduction, where would we put that? Where would it go in this
You could put that in any number of reserves, which is what this policy also, it's why it tells you what types of reserves exist. So typically what you'll find when a surplus ensues at the end of a budget year is some organizations dedicate that to capital. So they assign it to some capital purpose, or they might assign it to some other infrastructure deferred maintenance purpose. You can set up any number of assignments for any surplus that you see.
Okay.
That results in a budget.
Okay.
So this policy would, I'm sorry, just to follow that, this policy would create all these buckets, and it would show in the budget, these buckets.
It will show in the budget, and more importantly, it will show in your financial statements.
They might have zero, but they're in the bucket somewhere, based on this policy.
Right.
One more question.
Yes.
So do I understand right? It can be used for cash flow, but if we're going to move it from there to reassign it to another fund, that would have to be done by council approval.
That's exactly right. If you, from this economic and contingent, catastrophic reserve, yes. If you want to use it for capital, unless it's some catastrophic capital, well, actually, if you reopen conversation about the use of this, you can say right away, I want to use it for this. We're going to take the capital or take the catastrophic reserve and use it for something that happened catastrophically to something like a fire station or something like that, yeah.
Right, okay, I understand, thanks.
Thank you. And so I guess during the budget process, if we pass this policy, we're gonna have a bunch of buckets that we can say, we want to assign some portion of the unused, let's say we put 20% and we have another $1 million left somewhere. We can appropriate for streets, parks, any other things, and it's going to be dedicated just for that particular use, right? If we create an unassigned fund balance, correct?
You could do that.
But this isn't saying that. This is
No,
saying
no, no,
strictly
this,
for
so that's a different
catastrophic.
bucket. So if you look at page 2 and 3, so page 2 is, bucket 1 is catastrophic and economic contingency reserve. That's one bucket. That's the 20% bucket.
Right.
But there's other buckets that will be put in the budget one called assigned fund balance, and another bucket called unassigned fund balance, and then there might be a fourth one, replenishment of used reserve balance as a plan to replenish our reserve. So there's gonna be 4 buckets after this policy is made in our budget, right?
Correct. And absent any specific designation outside of the 20% economic contingency and catastrophic reserve, it would be an unassigned fund balance.
Correct.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any comments from the public? Okay, let's go around. Let's hear from folks. What were your thoughts, starting with Bruce?
On the proposal as is? Yeah, I think it's a definite in my book.
Any concerns?
I just trying to make sure I'm clear on the buckets that you're talking about and how, if they're all assigned, then it's always got to come back to the council. If it's unassigned, then it can be used.
Right, for the
Pretty much at the discretion, right?
CCP, because I can't say it that fast. What?
I mean.
Well, up to your point of, right.
Yeah, you would never want to have, you need to have some level of unassigned fund balance.
Right.
Just for the ebbs and flows of the budget process. Otherwise, you're tying everything up for a specific process or for an assigned process, and that may not be really fiscally prudent to do. You wouldn't give yourself that flexibility for staff between council meetings to make a change in the budget or something that would be necessary over time. There should be some level of unassigned fund balance. Certainly not all of it should be unassigned, but
No,
there should be a level, yeah.
Mr. Simmons?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
We're going to arm wrestle afterwards.
I still have the same concern about how we're going to determine this. My colleague across the aisle there, she says we have these items here. Who's going to determine whether it's a budget revenue taken over by another entity? Who's going to make those decisions? The city council? So you have 3 people sitting here, that's a majority present, it's a quorum, and they say, I think we need to take some of that money out of this account because we have the votes to do it, and I'm going to declare it a loss of business considered significant tax generation. There goes your reserve. And the full council wasn't there to vote on it. So I think there's got to be some measure in there that protects from that type of radical legislation, if you will. And I don't see it in this. So that's the only concern I have.
Thank you. And I think what I hear from you in this replenish and use or reserve balances, if for whatever reason funds are reserved, it should come up with a plan. Hopefully staff come up with a plan of how it's going to refurbish, how we're going to replenish that reserve fund. Like, you can't just say, I need $100,000 or $1 million. I think for a vote in front of the public, not just the council, but the public has to be aware that if you pull out monies, there has to be a plan associated how you're going to replenish that fund. So I think part of the, staff and the public, I imagine, the public, even if there's only 3 of us, the public's going to be pretty firm about exactly how we're going to use those dollars. Anyway, Vice Mayor?
I think this is great. I think it would give us a good, just a good framework for those dollars and a good plan going forward and help us to make sure that we're maintaining that reserve that we really want to keep for these type of things and have some security, a little buffer there that we haven't had. So I like the framework of this, and I think it's a good, good direction for us and help us to guide our thinking about the money that we're going to be having in our reserve. So I am for this. I'm not opposed to having a 4 out of 5 vote.
Okay.
But no, I think this is great. Thank you very much. This is something much needed for us, and I think it's a great addition to our newly being our foundation, really our foundation of strength for our city. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hudson?
As a small business owner, I get the idea of a reserve. I mean, I gotta have a reserve in my business, and for us to create one is just being judiciously responsible. Maybe another night I'd like to find out what happened to the old structures that disappeared, but
I think they were administratively created.
Not tonight, though. But I do agree with this, and with respect to Bill's perception 4 to 5, simple majority, whatever the case is. For process moving on, I mean, I like the way it looks right now for being able to make things happen. And I mean, with respect, let's.
Sorry, sir, we closed comments. Let's, I'm fine with 4/5. It really, I think, it doesn't matter to me if it's 4/5 or simple majority. The extra guard, I think is fine. I think for me, the public will be very interested in at any point in time that we're looking at taking funds out. So I think even if simple majority, there'll be a lot of pressure from the public or a lot of tension by the public. The 4/5, I think it's just kind of a political thing that depending on the condition, you may have political condition, you might have some folks who just don't believe in some types of public services, whether it's public safety or public works, and they just feel, well, just let's cut public works or let's cut police department or let's cut the fire department before we touch the reserves. And then, and if you have 2 of those people, they can actually run that whole council. So instead of having 3 people making a decision, you have only 2 people making that decision because they can block the vote. I'm not necessarily for that. I want to make sure that we get the reserve in place, and that we move forward. I guess for me is we have enough pressure from the public to do that, and I don't want to be placed in that position that we have 2 people who might decide that public works could be decreased before we take our reserve away. That's what could happen politically.
I don't mind if we stay with the 3/5 if we have a full council, not just a quorum. Then I would go for 3/5 without a problem. If we have a
with the full council.
to vote, not just
No
a quorum.
absenteeism. Yes, sir.
I like it.
I have 2 procedural comments. One is, if it's just a procedural rule, you can suspend the rules by a majority vote. So that's one way to look at it. So if you have 3 that really want to do it and it's just a procedural rule, it will never be a 4/5 vote. If you make it an ordinance, which would be binding on you, your ordinances are binding, you can undo the ordinance, you just have to wait about 60 days for that to wind on down. So whatever you do is ultimately not going to bind you absent a charter amendment, which we're not talking about. So if you didn't make it an ordinance, you could suspend the rules at any meeting. So I just want to point that out. I assume you're talking about an ordinance well, that's what it would have to be to really be more binding than just having 3 people vote to suspend the rules and then vote on it.
Because this is a policy, not an ordinance.
Well, if it's a policy,
it can
be undone by a majority.
That's exactly right.
And so what this council does by policy today, it can countermand tomorrow.
Absolutely.
All right, so if you don't put it into an ordinance, you're going to be able to undo it with 3 people.
That sounds good. Are we okay with simple majority?
Yes.
If we put it into an ordinance. If we just put it into a policy, then it can be changed at
anytime
by a majority anytime. It can, right? Am I understanding that right?
You can suspend the rules and override the policy on the spot.
But you can't do that if you change it to 4/5, right?
No.
If you make it by ordinance.
Do it by ordinance.
Or just vote. A majority could still say, you know what, we've changed our mind, but it would take them 60 days to get an ordinance on the books or to repeal that ordinance.
Yeah.
So it's not permanent, but it's pretty, it slows you down quite a bit. We have 60 days plus or minus to repeal that ordinance.
First and second readings.
Just the way you adopt it, you would repeal it, so.
Through a resolution.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
To a degree.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. It slows it down with minutia.
So just quickly, this is just a policy with a resolution. So if the council wants to go in an ordinance direction, we would have to bring that back, because this is not an ordinance tonight.
No.
So, and we can't turn it into one.
And you
here
can
and
establish a policy, and if nobody votes to suspend the rules, if they honor it, that's fine. And we as staff will honor it until somebody says, I move to suspend the rules. I'm just pointing that out.
Okay. What is, can we make an amendment? Can we make a Simmons amendment that this policy needs to include a 4/5 vote, or no?
You can do that right now.
Right?
And-
Okay.
And we will honor it as long as you honor it at your future meetings.
I want to get a sense from folks, Simmons amendment, or just regular,
I say yes.
yes to
With
Simmons amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
If that just simplifies the system so we can get,
Without making it an ordinance.
right,
Right.
without making an ordinance, then
So
yes.
that can be suspended at any time anyway, the
Right.
4/5, right?
Yeah,
There you
I
go.
know.
Not unless you make 4/5.
It's not enough.
That's kind of irrelevant to do if we're gonna just make 4/5.
It is
and
irrelevant,
3/5.
but I'm just trying to make folks happy.
I know what you're trying to
I know what
do,
you're
but
doing.
that's
You're
just
doing
gonna make,
good.
it can always go back to 3/5.
Someone make a motion.
Let's not play with that.
Councilmember Buttercoley, would you like to make a motion?
Like, I'll make a motion that we do as is, although I do think we ought to consider turning it to an ordinance.
Is there a second?
So that's the motion,
The motion right now is to approve the resolution as is.
with the consideration of an
Well,
ordinance. at a
no,
later
we
date.
don't need to do that because at any point you want to make something an ordinance, we can bring it back. But I think we have a policy for our budget process to move forward, so we have those buckets ready.
As we bring it back to consider. To consider.
To consider.
Then I would go for this.
So the
And I'll
motion's
make
on
the
the floor.
motion, go as is.
Motion, second. Roll call.
Would you consider a friendly amendment? No, we'll go with it.
Mr. Simmons?
Aye.
Mr. Botacavoli?
Aye.
Ms. McKenzie?
Aye.
Mr. Hudson?
Aye.
Mr. Semiala?
Aye. Motion's approved 5-0. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Love you guys.
Thank you.
Now they're gonna bring it back.
Trying to play politics with us over there.
Yeah, I'm not playing politics.
Just trying to protect future councils, that's all. 'Cause I know what's gonna happen.
Where are we at here?
Okay. Where are we now?
Oh, fire station.
9D. 9D is it's a resolution to approve, 9D is an item to approve Resolution 2019-15, authorizing the city manager to execute a municipal lease purchase agreement to acquire a Type 1 fire engine and a quick attack vehicle. Who's taking this? Chief Harlan? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Honorable Mayor and council members, before you is this staff report with resolution as you stated. I'll kind of cut to the chase to get to the points here. But we are asking for approval and have a recommendation from staff to authorize city manager to make this purchase of a Type 1 engine and a quick attack vehicle. It's in the amount of $950,000. It's a lease program that we have looked into that has benefits to our community and city for the financing plan, and it equates to a 15-year lease of an annual payment of $114,887, at which time, once those payments are done after 15 years, we will own the vehicle. Our financing plan also included a conservative budgeting scheme with the funds that we currently have right now in our savings account. We conservatively have 3 years of payments already in the bank, and our first payment wouldn't be due until we received the engine in May of 2020. Of those funds that we're utilizing, they're more of like one-time funds. Majority of that funds is from the strike team reimbursement from apparatus that we've gotten over the last 3 years. And then with District 10, they also, per our contract, will put in another $125,000 towards the purchase of an engine. So those funds are more of just a one-time funds we could take advantage of in trying to fix some of our apparatus issues. I know you're fully aware of our apparatus issues, so I'll spare you. And I know I couldn't get you to see the fire trucks, so I brought the fire trucks to you in the document that I provided, so you can kind of get a perspective of our fleet in the 1980s, back in the good days. So with that, it's a slow process. We're really into the planning right now. It does take a tremendous amount of time, so we're looking at 10 to 12 months. So this, even though we may authorize here soon, we won't be seeing a fire truck show up for almost a year. So it really is about the planning, and things have been exacerbated since our study session where I alluded to our issues with having 3 pieces of apparatus down currently. We just felt it's time to pull that trigger and start that planning process. We have some funds there. Like I say, we've already got funds for 3 years, and we'll keep saving more money over the next several years as well to put to that. Our goal is not to have to touch the general fund monies to pay for this equipment, and actually to pay it off in 10 years is our goal. So again, being conservative with our finance scheme, we think we can accomplish that. So if there's any questions, I'll entertain those.
Thank you. Questions for Chief?
Does that include the quick response team vehicle too, for 3 years?
For
Can that be procured within the next year?
The quick attack will arrive a little sooner. The chassis is about a 5-month order process, and then another 3 to 4 months after that to get it, equipped and built. So it's quicker than a Type 1 engine, but it's still, it takes time.
Yeah, but I'm thinking that's a major issue for us.
I'm curious, you said that you thought you could make these payments without touching the general fund. Where were you gonna get those? You said you had 2 months out of 15 years available now, but where were you thinking we're gonna save $114,000 a year?
So right now we have 3 years worth of payments already in savings. So
You have 3 years
3
worth.
years of
Oh,
payments.
excuse me, I thought you said 2.
We do a 1-year annual payment of that 114,000 per year.
Gotcha.
Those funds, majority of that came from strike team revenues we've been saving for the last 3 years that have just been going into a equipment replacement account. And then the other portion of that is at D10 Hall. So that already puts us ahead of the game. And so we'll keep collecting those funds. We go on strike teams every year. That revenue will keep going into our apparatus equipment replacement fund. That particular fund can't be used for personnel staffing per se. It has to go back into your equipment replacement. If we're audited by the state, we need to be able to justify we put those funds back into our apparatus.
Is there any market to get rid of the junk?
Well, we refer to that as relics, and when the antique pickers came through, we had a hard time beating them off our equipment. But we do have a plan to surplus. I'd like to give credit where credit's due. Fire Captain Poley and his crew here are in charge of the fleet maintenance program. So they do a lot of work to keep our antique relics running daily, even when we're down to the bottom of the barrel. And then we also have a surplus plan being developed to shrink the amount of resources we have. It's my opinion, we don't need as much resources we have. We need to shrink it down, get rid of our maintenance overhead costs.
Is that gonna bring us a savings, getting rid of some of that as insurance?
Well, for example,
DMV, registration and all that
I've
stuff?
had a discussion with Ms. Brown about, I was faced with having to spend $16,000 just to replace tires because they were over the DOT standards. And I didn't want to do that because I don't want to put good money into bad equipment. So we'll have a savings of funds, we'll surplus and sell items, we're going to reduce cost. It'll affect our mechanic shop, time, both with drawing in-house and other things. So it's going to take a little bit of time to see the actual effects, but you're going to see a reduction over time.
Thank you.
I noticed you're practicing, though, excuse me, through the chair. You were practicing the Buckeye Parade with your little pumper, so just keep it going. You guys are working out pretty good.
Yeah, I think I'm still hurting from that.
That might come to fruition,
Go ahead, Ms. Brown.
I just wanted to add also that, I think this kind of came up during the study session on the fire department, that we're looking at a number of other revenue-generating opportunities for the fire department, including, we're the only one that is about to have, hopefully, a fire inspector, and possibly offering that up as a fee-for-service to other parts of the county. We're also looking at the possibility of charging insurance for accidents that happen inside the city limits. Most of the state highways, the accidents are not Marysville residents, and charging, for those kinds of, response team from the fire department to people's medical insurance. So there's other things in the works. I don't want you to think that, I think that Chief Carlin has outlined a good strategy, but that, the margin might be a little bit thin, but I think I wanted you to know that there's, 3 or 4 other things about revenue generation that we're looking at as well.
And you would actually also save on some of your maintenance for your 217 truck?
As we start to reduce the fleet and we're left with newer equipment, then our maintenance costs will go down.
Yeah.
And as we don't have to run 217 or ladder truck on calls, then we'll go back to not having to worry about as much maintenance with our larger type of equipment as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any comments from the public on this matter?
Those 3 guys back there probably.
Like those
do.
guys in the back that are coming. I was saying the same thing.
Well, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve Resolution 2019-15.
Make motion.
There's a motion. Motion and second. Roll call.
Aye.
Mr. Simmons?
Aye.
Mr. Barcavoli?
Aye.
Ms. McKenzie? Mr. Hudson?
Aye.
Mr. Samayoa?
Aye.
That was a proud aye.
Resolution is approved with a vote of 5-0. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You do something about that train? Let's move to item 9E, approve a budget adjustment establishing appropriations for the Riverfront Park restroom project allocation, $250,000 to complete renovations. This recommendation comes from our Community Development and Services Director, Mr. Bermudez. Sir?
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Tonight action is, staff is recommending the council authorize a budget adjustment of the general fund allocating $250,000 to complete Riverfront Park restroom improvements. As the council's aware, in 2017, the city experienced a serious catastrophic event with the Oroville Dam and internal flooding within the city, mainly in the Riverfront Park area. The city did move forward with processing a claim with its insurer, McLaren's, and at that time, when we completed the claim, there was an initial award of $500,000 for damage that was incurred. The city allocated portions of that claim to do various improvements within Riverfront Park and completed those improvements. When all was said and done, there was some funding available, and we worked with the insurer to take another look at the damaged restrooms as part of the emergency and the spillway failure. And then ultimately, the insurance green-lighted to move forward with full replacement of the Riverfront dock restrooms and fixtures at the various restrooms within Riverfront Park. What staff is bringing forward today is to allocate our share of that portion and responsibility of a deductible of $250,000 that would be made through the city's general fund. So with that, staff is seeking, as I mentioned, budget adjustment for the $250K to complete the restroom park improvements, which at this point, they are about 75% complete. That concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you. Questions? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the budget adjustment of the general fund establishing appropriations of the Riverfront Park restroom project allocating $250,000 to complete renovations.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Simmons. Second by Vice Mayor. Also in favor.
Discussion?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. There's an error in, it's not Riverfront Park, it's Beckworth Riverfront Park, and it needs to be, it's the official title of that Riverfront Park by resolution of this council. So it's a wordsmithing. Now.
So with that
Let me just ask a
amendment,
question. Do we have a choice? I mean,
We have a
is there-
choice?
Let me rephrase that. Is there another alternative?
I think there were some
you haven't found
alternatives
any
on
other
how to pay for the
alternative, right?
250?
Pardon me?
How to pay for the 250?
Yeah. It doesn't sound like there's, if they obviously have looked into it, all options, and we don't have any alternative, do we?
I think the alternative is leaving it at 75% completed.
Well, we don't even have the money to, we have to pay for that still, too. That's the 300 and something
Correct.
thousand, so we still have to pay another
Yep.
175,000, so.
Motion is second on the floor. Any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Against? Well, it's approved with a vote of 5-0. Committee reports. No committee reports? I did attend
Mr. Mayor?
yes, sir.
Let me just speak on the fact that, based on some of the committees that we had a little discussion today with the roads with the roads committee, and really would probably, I think staff is gonna bring back a proposal that, they tend to be somewhat useless, the committees. And we discussed some different options that I think the staff's going to present to us to take a look at that might
Be more
change-
functional?
Yeah, a little more efficient for one thing, and so.
Well, thank you for that.
That discussion happened today.
Awesome. I do want to bring up, thank you for that. I attended the Bi-County homeless meeting. And again, there's going to be an ordinance coming to us at some point in time that is going to kind of align everyone's ordinance on how to deal with encampments in our area. So that should be coming up sometime in the next couple of months, I'm assuming. But I think that both counties are really moving forward in that direction. And the benefit is that we'll be able to assist each other on how to manage homeless encampments, which will be a great benefit. Because in any case, I think part of the issue is that we can't implement our no camping ordinance without having some type of facility that we can send folks to, beds or shelter or whatever it may be. But having this collaborative ordinance will allow us to maybe work with Yuba City if they have a shelter or a space that we might be able to send some of our folks out there as well. So that's coming up. I do want to say that particular committee is really working really hard in identifying funding for some sheltering and some for housing and for, I think what I really like, and I'll try to bring some of the data, is actually the good things that families are actually finding fixed homes. They're actually getting jobs, they're moving people into an actual self-sustainability, and there's actual numbers of families and individuals that are moving in that direction. So things are really working really well as long as we continue working together. City manager report. Or any other committee reports, I'm sorry? No? Okay. City manager's report.
Really quickly, the Parks Master Plan is now available at the city's website online for review in preparation for the study session that's going to be happening on April 2nd, Joint Planning Commission and Council study session. And we have an exciting ribbon cutting of our Linda Main connection on Thursday at 4 o'clock at 130 F Street to officially flip the switch to connect to the Linda Main connection.
And let it flow.
Exactly. It's exciting.
Thank you. Council comments? Councilmember Baracavoli? Councilmember Simmons?
One comment. I received a phone call from a fisherman, and he was really excited about the fact that Marysville and the county of Yuba is maintaining our side of the river. It doesn't have a lot of homeless refuge around. I made a special comment of that on the Yuba River. Our guys are out there, they're picking it up, taking care of it. And he said you go across the east side of the Yuba River, it's like a jungle. There's cars, derelict cars, engines, garbage thrown all over it. So our guys are doing a job.
Thank you.
Let's hear it for our guys.
Mr. Hudson?
No, I'd just like to thank Chief Carlin for bringing Marysville Fire up to par with its equipment. I hope it keeps going that way. That's it.
Vice Mayor?
I met with the new director of the Twin Cities Rescue Mission. I don't know if you've talked to him, Kevin Carlson, but he reached out to me, and they have been, they just actually celebrated 60 years of being in operation in Marysville. So that's a long history of serving homeless men and women in the area. So they've had their ups and downs through the years, but they have they really are interested right now in working with the jurisdictions more than they have in the past. So I'm excited about seeing what that means to the consortium and with the group that you're going to. So
Correct.
I think we can see some new things happening there. I'm excited about it. They're all excited over there. So that's a good report from them.
Thank you. I had a question for staff. I know there was conversations about the property on Ramirez owned by Ocho Penti. Are they moving forward on demolishing that? clearing that stuff?
We spoke with the property owner. We were initially trying to roll that into a fire exercise and drill to use it as a burn site and training exercise. Chief Carlin reached out to them. We seem not to get any progress on that side. There's a lot of, I think, red tape, government check-the-box kind of items when you go down that path, so that could have been a little bit of a barrier of why they didn't move forward. I don't know. But with that said, subsequently, there was a fire at that site as we were trying to put this together. So Chief Carlin and my staff got together to say, I think it's time that we need to address some issues there. So we reached out to the property owner and set some arrangement that ultimately where we want to go as a city is to see the site taken down and demolished to actually the actual subfloor area, and that would be satisfactory from a code enforcement level. We more or less did a gentleman's agreement over the phone to not exercise, a full enforcement initiative, and we're still kind of waiting to see where this is going to head. Ultimately, we do have that ability to go through the code enforcement side to seek compliance, but we have yet to do that at this point. So we're waiting to see if he's going to fulfill that.
Has he signaled that he wants to do his development?
Yes.
But has he signaled that he wants to develop there?
No.
No.
Yeah, he signaled he will demolish for
Correct.
sure, but as far as future build out of the site, there's no reference to that.
Okay. I don't know, I thought he had a permit, but who knows? Ocho Penti's property, the old sign yard. It's our recollection their use permits were given to them for a project, but it could be.
What I want to verify is that we're actually talking about the same property, that we are talking about the property with old dilapidated.
burnt, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. As far as use permits, there is a use permit. I believe our code, we don't have a sunset on our use permits, other than the fact that you have to fulfill some activity with the use permit. So there's not like a set time, but you have to make steps that you are going to progress with that particular permit moving forward.
Okay. Thank you. With that, let's move to item 14, closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6, Conference of Labor Negotiating Marty Brown regarding the following bargaining units: Teamster, Marysville Police Officer Association, sworn and non-sworn, and Marysville Firefighters Association.
You're going to adjourn to Maryland?
I didn't have it here.
No, I didn't get it before the agenda was.
What's her name?
Maryland.
Goldfield?
I think it's Goodfield.
Staff were given direction and no reportable action. We adjourn in memory of Mary Goodfield to our regular meeting of City Council on April 2nd, 6 p.m.